politics.
We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12 noon, a very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday lunchtime. Junior doctors put down their placards, but are the nurses about to pick theirs up once again? The result of a ballot by the RCN on their latest pay offer is due, and there are indications it could be rejected. If that happens, nurses could soon be back in the picket lines. Where will that leave the growing crisis in the NHS? His last day in Ireland and a pilgrimage for Joe Biden. The President returns to his roots in County Mayo and visits the Holy Shrine of Knock. We'll have all the latest live as his feet bring him to where his heart is. And all the runners and riders at Aintree. We'll even tell you about the horses, as Ladies' Day sees racegoers negotiating a few hurdles, including the rain, getting to Merseyside's big event. That's some hat. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. The Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. Nurses and other health workers have been voting over a 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. Meanwhile, Unison's ballot result is expected over the next few days. Shadow Treasury Minister James Murray says the government has not done enough to avoid industrial action.
It feels like the government hasn't really learnt anything from what's been going on over many months. When you look at the junior doctor dispute and the government's failure to negotiate with them, you know, negotiations are about compromise. When you have the employee representatives setting out what their initial starting point is, I think people know they're not likely to get that. There is going to have to be compromise. That's the necessity of negotiation is to make sure a compromise happens. But having that compromise, having that deal, is what is so critical about avoiding industrial action going ahead.
A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Tashari was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It's the most serious security breach in the US in years. The King is visiting Sandhurst Royal Military Academy for the 200th Sovereign's Parade. We are looking at live pictures now of the event where King Charles is inspecting the officer cadets who have completed their commissioning. During the ceremony, which is held 3 times a year, the Sword of Honour, the Overseas Sword and the King's Medal will also be awarded to the top officer cadets. Meanwhile, a student is on trial after eggs were thrown at the King during a visit to York in November. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell is charged with threatening behaviour contrary to the Public Order Act. The University of York student denies the charge. Speaking ahead of his appearance, the accused said his actions were a protest against the government.
My defence is that I was acting to prevent people who suffer at the hands of the British state day in and day out because of the unlawful violence that's carried out by this state regime, which is descending into fascism in front of our eyes. But my main defence is not a legal one, it's a moral one. And then that is that my actions are those of a free person defending themselves, because we all have the right to stand up against a government that's stripping us of our rights, banning protest, and we need to stand up. And that's what my actions were.
The government says the Prime Minister has spoken with Ukraine's president this morning to discuss further military support. Rishi Sunak has paid tribute to the efforts of the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Mr Sunak also branded the beheading of a Ukrainian soldier circulating on social media as appalling. He has also called on Ukraine's allies to continue to build Kyiv's strong position on the battlefield. The US president is ending his trip to Ireland by visiting his ancestral hometown. Joe Biden has left Dublin and is on his way to the west of the country for a tour. He's also expected to speak at a cathedral in County Mayo later this evening. His ancestor sold 27,000 bricks to the very same cathedral that he's visiting today, which later helped his family to sail to America. The AA says it has been called to nearly 2,000 potholed incidents every day last month. The breakdown service said it is being caused by long periods of wet weather. It says the damage would have left drivers with a collective bill of over £160,000 for just new tyres. Liberal Democrats say fly tipping has been effectively legalised under Conservatives. The party's latest research shows just 1 in 500 cases lead to prosecution. They also say more than 1 million fly tipping incidents were recorded between 2021 and 2022 in England, but only less than 2,000 resulted in legal action. The government called the figure inaccurate, saying it does not take into account 91,000 fixed penalty notices issued during that period. The European Space Agency is due to make a second launch attempt after its mission to Jupiter was postponed due to bad weather. The spacecraft was meant to take off yesterday to see if Jupiter's moons support life, but it will now launch at 14 minutes past 1 this afternoon. It is the ESA's first attempt to send a probe to orbit another planet's moon. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. So, Joe Biden's final day in Ireland, and it looks as if it will be a day of pilgrimage. He's returning to his roots in the west of the country with a public address at the cathedral in Ballina, built with bricks supplied no less by his own great-great-grandfather, Edward Blewett. Well, former Taoiseach Enda Kenny said that he hopes the US president will receive an almighty welcome, but how sure now are his political foundations after remarks that the UK should work more closely with Ireland to support the North? Let's go to Dublin and catch up with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's been following this presidential visit. And Darren, interesting that Michael Martin, the Deputy Prime Minister, has indicated that he believes these remarks on the UK working more closely was an exhortation for everyone to cooperate. But, you know, it's been a really sensitive issue, isn't it, bearing in mind how little time that the president spent in the North?
Yeah, I think it is a sensitive issue in the sense that clearly relations between London and Dublin have been pretty strained in recent years. And let's be frank about this, that's largely down to Brexit and those really tough negotiations between the European Union and the UK on what was going to happen to the Irish border. We all remember the Irish backstop and Theresa May trying to strike a deal, so on and so on. However, what I would say is I think these remarks are being slightly overinterpreted in the sense that we know that Rishi Sunak and Leo Varadkar have recognised in the last couple of months that actually they do need to work together a lot more closely in order to try and get Stormont restored. I mean, Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom is assured while the majority of people want it to remain. So that's what's inside the Good Friday Agreement. It's an accepted state, I would say, by all the political parties in Northern Ireland. But that's not obviously to recognise the fact that, you know, this is one island and Dublin has a part to play, and that Rishi Sunak has made a concerted effort in really the time since he's been Prime Minister to ensure that there is greater cooperation with Dublin. It is interesting that when he became Prime Minister back in October, the two first people he called as Prime Minister was the Irish Prime Minister and the EU Commission President. So all I would say is I think Joe Biden may be making a point. It could be interpreted as a slap on the wrist, but in the end it's actually the political reality where both London and Dublin are on the same page that they do need to work better together.
Now, a day, of course, of photo opportunities. He's going to the sanctuary at Knock, visited, of course, by the Pope in 2018, but also to St Muradach's Cathedral, built with bricks, no less, 27,000 of them, supplied by his great-great-grandfather. So a day of great sort of photo opportunity. But I guess that the White House press pack are going to want to ask him about this security leak and what's emerged there in the States.
Yeah, indeed. The photo opportunities continue on the last day of President Biden's visit. As you say, he's going to leave Dublin pretty soon, actually any time now, and travel to the west of Ireland to Knock, to what is a Catholic shrine. Joe Biden, not just an Irish-American president, but a Catholic too. I was there. I was covering the Pope's visit, actually, in 2018. And President Biden is going to have a look around the church and the shrine. It's believed that the Virgin Mary, Catholics believe the Virgin Mary appeared there over 100 years ago. And then it's a relatively short journey to Ballot in County Mayo, kind of the big set piece, I would almost say, of this visit, in the sense that he's going to stand up and actually talk to Irish people directly. Tens of thousands expected to gather in that Mayo town. It is where his ancestors, yet again, are from. But you're right in pointing out, President Biden has not had a press conference during this entire visit. It's a 4-day visit, and actually for US presidents, that's quite a long period of time. There's been criticism at home that he's not answered any questions in terms of a press conference form. He tried to address this issue yesterday around the leaks and the subsequent arrest of this young man in the United States, saying that he wasn't overly concerned, given that he felt that much of the information that had been linked wasn't no longer current. But clearly there is a major investigation that has led to the arrest of a National Guardsman in the United States, and there will be concern about the ramifications this could well have in terms of intelligence sharing around the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and given obviously the indications that this may have been going on for a few months, maybe those White House reporters pressing him, of course, when he said yesterday, well, he wasn't too worried because it wasn't contemporaneous material released. But overall, I mean, as certainly Enda Kenny said, you know, he's going to have an almighty welcome there in the West. I mean, this has been a pretty triumphal sort of 3-4 days for him, in addition to what happened in Belfast.
Yeah, I think in the sense that Joe Biden clearly loves Ireland. There is little doubt about that. You only had to look at the pictures, Mark, yesterday, which, you know, you were across, where you could see he was thoroughly enjoying himself. And let's be honest about this, the majority of Irish people quite like Joe Biden, and they quite like that relationship that Ireland, a very small country in Western Europe, has with the United States. Clearly it's got an awful lot of soft power, if you like, in Washington, and the Irish do the kind of warm welcome quite well. That's not to say that his visit has been universally approved. A lot of unionists feel that that warm welcome from the Irish and his love of Ireland comes at the expense of unionism, particularly in Northern Ireland, and maybe even the special relationship with Britain. It's something the White House have batted away, though, saying, actually, if you look at it, it was President Biden who sent the AUKUS deal. It was President Biden that has insisted on a close relationship with the Ukraine conflict, NATO, the G7, UN Security Council, and so on. So I'm not entirely sure it is a zero-sum game where if you're terribly Irish, you're actually anti-British. But yeah, you're right. The images will look good for President Biden. They'll play well at home. And in the end, probably, if he's going to seek to win the next general election, maybe that's in the end all he's really worried about, is that for the 30-40 million Irish Americans, this seems to have gone quite well for him.
Darren, for the moment, thank you. Back to you, of course, as we see the beast leave Dublin as they head to the west of the country, and keep people updated with all the live pictures on that. But let's take you some more live pictures that we're getting from Sandhurst. And this is the 200th Sovereign's Parade, the passing out parade for all these cadets at the Royal Military Academy there. And there is Charles speaking. I don't know if we can hear what he's got to say.
Of these partnerships, which you all experience and assist in developing.
Well, a slightly echoey microphone there, but of course the King there with his medals on display with this first as King, this first passing out parade. And of course we reflect that both Princes Harry and William have been at this particular occasion, passing out as officers and gentlemen, some would reflect. And of course Sandhurst renowned across the world for training the elite soldiers and officers of the various regiments. Just to reflect that we have got, in terms of the coronation, as the King speaks here, a YouGov poll indicating that most British people, wait for this, are not interested in the King's coronation. Shock. Yes, a survey of 3,000 adults conducted this month, 35% saying they do not care very much about the historic event, 29% saying they do not care at all. Oh dear. However, we're being told that the apathy is highest among younger age groups. Indeed, 75% of those aged between 18 and 24 saying they do not care very much or at all. But we are also getting indications that people do actually enjoy coverage of such occasions, which is a bit of a relief for GB News, which, of course, will be following the big day here in GB News with the King and Prince Harry visiting, of course. That's the big news, that he is heading across the Atlantic for that occasion, a former cadet at Sandhurst. Now, let's update you on the state of play with the Health Service, because the Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the latest ballot results over how those nurses have voted on the pay offer from the government, with indications it could even be rejected, albeit narrowly. Now, if that is the case, nurses could be returning to the picket lines as around, of course, 47,000 junior doctors end their fourth day of strike action today. Now, members of the RCN and Unison have been considering the 5% offer this year with a non-consolidated cash payment for last year. Let's get the views now of Roy Lilly, former NHS administrator, now a health writer and commentator. Roy, thanks for joining us once more. We have to say we haven't got the official result, of course. This is a suggestion in the Times newspaper that it might be quite a narrow margin, but that it could indeed be rejected. The nurses feeling they're not really being paid what they are worth.
No, good morning, Mark. I think it's going to be very close, and all the indications I've got is that it's going to be a no. You see, the RCN went into battle wanting 19%. They wanted retail price index plus 5%, which brought them to 19%. Well, they rode back off of that, and eventually they ended up in discussions. Berkeley, I think, all he had to offer was 5%. I think that was the money that came from the Treasury as a result of the Treasury having more money than they expected, higher tax receipts and lower interest rates on borrowing. So that he offered them 5%, I think, and said, well, it's 5% or nothing. What do you want to do? So they accepted it and recommended it. But of course, it's 5% is more than 3% underneath today's inflation figure of about 8.5%. So there'll be a lot of people who'll be disappointed. There is an issue, although, amongst the lower paid, where the lump sums, I think the so-called COVID bonus, which, in some instances is well over £1,000. I think a lot of people in the lower pay bands, 5 and so on, I think that might come as a windfall for them, and they'll say, do you know what, we'll take it. But it's going to be close, Mark. And the thing is that the RCN have a writ to run for strikes for 6 months. If I've done my calculations right, if it's a no and they're going to return to striking, they'll have to give notice on Monday of the next dates they intend to strike. So it's going to be tight and very interesting. I'm surprised we don't have the answer. I know the poll stopped at 9 o'clock this morning. I thought we'd have an answer by lunchtime, but we're still waiting.
Yeah, and of course there's another union, Unison, who are due to give their results. Sarah Gorton telling those members the best to be achieved through negotiation. But it begs the question, what happens next? Do the RCN then join the British Medical Association on the picket lines to put yet more pressure on the government. Where does that leave all those NHS managers trying to cover in terms of emergency treatment? And, of course, the growing backlog of those procedures and appointments being missed.
Well, I mean, in terms of contingency planning, what I would expect to be happening is that I know there was a COBRA meeting last week. What I would expect to be happening is, I mean, it's pretty obvious that if the nurses continue to strike and the junior doctors, they've got several months left on this on their current ballot. If they were to synchronise their strike days, that would be very difficult. And I would expect to see some hospitals actually close their A&Es.
Really?
The ambulances would be directed to perhaps regional centres, because there are three things you do when you've got this kind of a problem. You protect the front door, the blue light, the front door, so you make sure you've got skills looking after people seriously ill coming in the front door. You have to make sure the wards are safe, because people are in hospital, you know, not for no reason. They're not all waiting to go home. Some of them are very sick. And you have to keep the flow going. You have to get somebody responsible enough to authorise discharge. Those are the three things you have to take care of.
Okay.
If you can't do the front door, then you have to close the hospital.
You're absolutely serious about that? The administrators may have to actually tell the government, we can't take any patients, we're closed for business.
Yes, because it wouldn't be safe. What they do then is they take the A&E consultants and put them all in one place. I mean,
Right.
it will be safe, but it would just be in a different place.
But a huge embarrassment for the government, and in fact, you know, sort of wargaming or triage in terms of emergency medical centres being set up. We're getting indications from the unions.
Well, it would. I mean, we sort of saw this in COVID, where it was forced upon us for reasons that we understand. But that's the contingency planning that I would expect. And of course, yes, I mean, it puts the government in a very difficult position. I mean, look, we've got an unpopular government whose prospects for re-election in 18 months' time look now pretty slim. The Prime Minister has made one of his 5 claims to improve things, to reduce waiting times in the NHS. Well, of course, with the disruption of the junior doctors' strike, and before that, the nurses' strike, and before that, another junior doctor strike, I mean, we're looking at probably 300, 400, maybe 500,000 people who've been dislodged out of their place in the waiting list. And then the problem then is, what do you do with them?
Yeah, and how do you get that backlog cleared? Just to talk about the financial position, I mean, both the RCN and Unison were saying to those members, we think this is the best that we'll get through negotiation. As we're saying, clearly the RCN members think, no, it's still not good enough. An even higher figure in terms of the British Medical Association, which the government says, you know, there's no way we can afford that. Jeremy Hunt saying we have to be considerate of the position with inflation. Where are we going to go from this in terms of the industrial relations? I mean, is there any more money that can get from other sources?
Well, I mean, if I was trying to do a deal with the doctors, I would do a 3-year deal with them. I'd say, look, you know, I can't do 35% in 1 year.
Yeah.
But I can do 5% this year. That's the high water mark. That's what we've dealt with the nurses. You're going to have to settle for 5%. Next year, I'd maybe do 6%. Bear in mind, inflation will be coming down, so 6% will be actually worth more in spendability. And then in the third year, I'd do 7%, because let's face it, it's highly likely that the Labour government's going to have to find the money for the 7%. So I would try and push them into a 3-year deal. And I think that's sensible. They're on a 3-year deal now. They're used to that. So that's the way I would approach that. And as far as the nurses are concerned, if we have to go back to the table, well, I mean, from what I heard of what happened in the negotiations with the nurses, I think Steve Barclay was signalling, look, I'd give you more if I could, but all I've got is 5% from the Treasury. Take it or leave it, put it to your members, see what they say.
Roy, as ever, thanks for your expert analysis, and we see, of course, what happens with that ballot and if we get the results coming through in these next few hours. Thank you very much indeed. Also, coming up, let's just update you on the fact that fresh strikes to be held by civil servants. The government announcing a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%, but described by civil service union leaders as an insult. So, far from the industrial situation seeming to be calming down, Another indication that perhaps we've got more stoppages on the way. Also coming up, Lord David Owen reacting to the arrest of that 21-year-old US National Guardsman. How secret are American secrets? That's coming up in a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Let's update you now on this case of a 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman, Jack Teixeira, who's been arrested by the FBI on suspicion of leaking highly classified Pentagon documents. Indeed, the indication is from the Pentagon that it was a deliberate criminal act in their view. Among the leaked documents, assessments of the latest war situation in Ukraine and secrets about America's allies, which are embarrassing. Well, President Biden trying to downplay the damage the leaks have done, saying that there was nothing contemporaneous, but MPs in Britain warning they could have put British lives at risk. Let's get more with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, joining us in the studio. And, well, a lot of people are absolutely incandescent in the fact that a 21-year-old intelligence officer, an IT technician, effectively, has been able to put all this out on effectively the World Wide Web.
Yes, it is a remarkable story. This is a Discord server on that platform that's mostly used by gamers. It's been around since 2020. A group of maybe 20 to 30 people, it is believed, of one of which was Jack Teixeira, who sort of gained clout in this group, this private group online, by sharing this sort of information. And then recently what seems to have happened is someone else from that group has shared it onto other groups on Discord. One, a Minecraft server where people were talking about maps of Minecraft, and then they started sharing maps of the war in Ukraine.
Real-time maps.
And another on a Discord server owned by a YouTuber called Wow Mao, in reference to Chairman Mao of Chinese communist fame, who has recently been putting out new YouTube videos saying, this is nothing to do with me, I'm just a micro-internet celebrity, please stop following this. But from these Discord servers, it then moved on to the internet site 4chan, and from there to Telegram groups, pro-Russian war Telegram groups, private groups, and then on to Twitter, where the media picked it up last
and
week.
this is when the Pentagon started to obviously be alarmed when it was picking it up. I mean, this is the worry, that this may have been going on for months. And no one in authority actually spotted it.
This has been going around the gaming community, frankly, teenagers. It's been going around private Telegram groups amongst the pro-Russian war community. It has been spreading and percolating around these different corners of the internet. And it's only last week that people really seized upon it when it broke out onto 4chan and then onto Twitter, that really what has happened subsequently is both the intelligence community in America and, frankly, journalists, investigative journalists, have been tracing back these steps, seeing how far we can go to get back to that original poster, which it quite possibly seems to have been this guy, Jack Teixeira.
Yeah, and we should say, obviously, the investigation's continuing, although he's obviously accepted he had this moniker, I think, OG, and within this group, Thug Shaker Central.
Original gangster of the Thug Shaker Central group.
And one then questions, how is it that, you know, a 21-year-old IT technician, so-called intelligence officer, doesn't appear to have the intelligence to realise what he was putting out there could be so potentially damaging?
There are some suggestions of motivation behind this. The group seemed to have an anti-war perspective, a suspicion of government, and so there are potentially some arguments there. But a lot of the other people that have spoken to media that have been on these groups have said that this is not really a political thing at all. This is people sharing stuff, trying to gain clout online.
Well, I mean, is this what he was just trying to show off? Is literally that the long and short of it?
I mean, this is quite possibly the case, but of course, nothing is certain here. We don't actually even know if he is the original provenance of these documents. It just seems likely that it is that way. But it is fascinating. The photographs he took of these documents, they seem to have been folded up and taken home, potentially. And through the sort of corners of the pictures where you could see some of the background, people have been able to piece together where it might possibly have been.
Which is perhaps why the Pentagon has called this a deliberate criminal act. However, let's just reflect also while you're here that we're being told by Number 10 that Rishi Sunak and Volodymyr Zelensky discussed ramping up, as they say, military support to Ukraine in a phone call this morning.
Yes.
Prime Minister saying that we needed to continue to ensure Ukraine in the strongest possible position to build on its recent battlefield successes. But we are being told that the Ministry of Defence intelligence briefing said that Ukrainian forces were making orderly withdrawals from Bakhmut because of the bombardment with Russian artillery. So, you know, there are still real concerns about whether Ukraine can actually see this through.
There are some concerns. There are concerns about artillery. There are also concerns about airspace and the ability of the Ukrainians to keep the Russians back and stop air superiority from being delivered. We know, of course, the call of Volodymyr Zelensky when he came to the United Kingdom Parliament, when he went to the Congress. He wanted those jets, which, frankly, have not been sent. So there are still concerns, but we do know that Zelensky and Sunak are in regular contact. This is not an unusual call. These happen fairly regularly, and we do get these readouts where sort of the broad themes of what were discussed are laid out.
Yeah, and of course we'll assess the situation on the ground. We hope to speak to former President Poroshenko a little later here on GB News Live. But Tom, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. And of course, one of those leaks suggesting that the Ukraine is running out of air defence missiles and ammunition as well. Coming up, the latest in Paris, the protests entering their 13th day, why the judges now have police protection. We'll be updating you on that. First, an update on all the headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm Rory Smith in the GB Newsroom. We're going to start with some breaking news we've been getting in the last half hour. And civil servants They will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCAS union's General Secretary described the announcement as insulting and completely inadequate. We will bring you more on this as we get it. Staying with strikes, and the Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. Nurses and other health workers have been voting over a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash payment for last year. Meanwhile, Unison's ballot result is expected over the next few days. A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It is the most serious security breach in the US in years. The King is visiting Sandhurst Royal Military Academy for the 200th Sovereign's Parade. You're looking now at live pictures of the event. King Charles is there. He's inspecting the officer cadets who have completed their commissioning. During the ceremony, which is held 3 times a year, the Sword of Honour, the Overseas Sword and the King's Medal will also be awarded to the top officer cadets. The US President is ending his trip to Ireland today by visiting his ancestral hometown. Joe Biden has left Dublin. He's now on his way to County Mayo, where he is expected to speak at a cathedral. His ancestors sold 27,000 bricks to the building, which later helped his family to sail to America. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we were discussing the leak of these secrets, Pentagon basically saying it's a criminal act. Just to remind you that 21-year-old Massachusetts Air Guardsman or National Guardsman Jack Teixeira is due in court today in connection with this alleged leak of highly classified documents. Arrested by the FBI, of course, and to give us an idea now of how significant this may be, let's speak to former Foreign Secretary, Lord David Owen, who can speak to us. Thank you very much indeed for your time here on GB News. We know already, of course, that MPs have announced that this may well have put British lives at risk. However, President Biden saying none of these details were contemporaneous, but clearly there'll be a lot of assessment going on now in the intelligence community.
Yes, bound to. It's damaging, obviously, but not devastating. But it's a warning to us all that there is open access these days to technology, and young people are very able at getting into material which they're not meant to be able to read. And that's the reality of life, I fear.
Yeah, so does it tell us perhaps more about social media than it does about the whole sort of issue of spying as such, and what was termed by the Pentagon this deliberate criminal act?
Well, I think that's probably accurate description. It was deliberate, and it will probably prove to be criminal. I'm sure it will. But that's a matter for the courts. What's a matter for the Pentagon in particular is to review all their procedures. We live in an open society. The American military have become much more open since sort of Vietnam days. They're trying to get more and more of their employees, people involved, to know what's happening, which is a good instinct. The trouble is that it is open to abuse, and this young man has clearly and very seriously abused it. Fortunately, he's not doing it as a Russian spy. He's not doing it, it appears, from many motives which would be connected with defense. It's much more connected with their wish to have a chat group which feel they're in the know, they're above everybody else. They've been able to sort of, it's more juvenile behavior than, if you like, deliberately damaging to the United States behavior. But that certainly is what has happened as a result of what they've done.
And is there a worry in that very fact that this was a 21-year-old intelligence officer, an IT technician with clearly access to some very sensitive information, but not realising then the import of what he was putting out there indirectly into the public arena?
That appears to be the case, and this is the problem. You use the tech-minded people because you need them to facilitate access, but they then have their own agenda and their own connections, and they're showing their colleagues, their young colleagues, that they've got access. It appears that it was not intended to go beyond this chat group, but of course it obviously did. And so, look, it could have happened to us, and we've got to be relaxed about it in the sense that we must not let it damage the essential relationship which is between our Ministry of Defence and the Pentagon. It's a very good relationship at the moment. We must all be very sad that it's obviously had some impact on Ukrainian defence planning, but they are grateful for the cooperation they've had from Britain and America. I don't believe that this will lead to permanent dislocation or great deal of dissatisfaction. We all know it could have happened to us.
I will ask you about the situation with Ukraine in a moment, because Rishi Sunak and Zelensky have been on the phone this morning. But just on the transatlantic relationship, and going back, of course, to what happened with WikiLeaks, and a few barriers came up as a result of that in terms of information sharing. Do you think that this could really affect relations where perhaps the UK in particular thinks, well, we've got to be careful about what we're sharing with the Americans here?
Well, that might be the instinct, but I think common sense will prevail and a sense of humility. It could have happened to us. And we have had a very close link on intelligence over many, many decades with America. And sometimes we had a lot of spies inside our system, particularly in the late 1940s. And it was an embarrassment. It went on into the 50s. And there was some finger pointing from Washington. Can we trust the Brits? Now, when we are on the other side, the receiving end, if you like, of their system, we've got to show a sense of proportion and not start pointing fingers. It could have happened to us if we're honest about it.
Okay, so
I think it's more likely to happen in America than us. They've got more technicians, more sharing of information. But a lot of people will be changing practices on both sides of the Atlantic.
But maybe a sense of humility, bearing in mind, as you say, what happened with our spies and the Cambridge spy ring and so on. But one more thought for you, Lord Owen, and this is that Rishi Sunak says he's spoken to Volodymyr Zelensky this morning on the phone to discuss, as they call it, ramping up military support to Ukraine, and an indication that perhaps the Russians have been pouring artillery onto the Donetsk area and to Bakhmut, and an indication that perhaps the Ukrainians have got to withdraw. I mean, there's still an assessment, of course, that the Russians could prevail here.
I'm very against telling the Ukrainians how to handle this war. It is not our war. We are not combatants. We have not got an engagement, anything more than a defensive alliance using their right to help a neighboring country, a country which we've got increasingly closer to politically and in friendship terms. And I think what NATO has done has been very clever and also wise, but we must not cross the line. We are not combatants. And that is very crucial. Russia will try and say this shows that NATO is involved on the ground, NATO is involved in this war, and therefore we can start using weapons against NATO. That is nonsense, and it needs to be shown to be nonsense. And so we must avoid ourselves giving the Russians the advantage of being able to point our involvement as being unwise. They obviously think that, but incorrect. We are entitled to do what we're doing with NATO, helping a friend, but we are not part of this war, and we must not become part of this war.
Lord David Owen, thank you very much indeed for sharing your assessment with us here on GB News. Great to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And we are due to speak to former President Poroshenko a little later in Ukraine. But let's take you to Ireland, because it is going to be a busy day for this particular aircraft. Air Force One on the tarmac, and indications that this will be travelling back to Delaware tomorrow. But meanwhile, we've got the President heading down to County Mayo, to the west of Ireland, where he will be, a personal pilgrimage and a religious pilgrimage, because going to see the areas so dear to his own family, in particular St Muradach's Cathedral, which was built with the help of 27,000 bricks supplied by his great-great-grandfather, Edward Blewett, and then going on to the Catholic pilgrimage site of Knock, the holy shrine there visited by Pope Francis back in 2018, and also indications that he will be receiving, as Enda Kenny, the former Taoiseach, said, an almighty welcome. So we'll keep you updated on that as the visit continues. The fourth and final day, of course. Now, King Charles has been inspecting the 200th Sovereign's Parade at the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst, and there to review the officer cadets during the ceremony, the Sword of Honour, the Overseas Sword, and the King's Medal, all being awarded by the Sovereign's representative to the best in each cohort. A very important day, of course, for all those passing out. Well, joining us now is royal broadcaster Helena Chard, and of course the commander-in-chief, as he is now, as the king, the top man. But just reflecting on something else that emerged while he was at Sandhurst, this YouGov poll saying that the coronation itself proving not to be very popular with people, particularly the youngsters. Oh dear.
I think a lot of the youngsters of a certain age group don't relate as well to the royal family. But I don't think it's a big enough section to poo-poo the whole coronation. As far as I'm aware, it's a 65% lead, 65 to 35. So all good, and we're really looking forward to it all. So great as well to see King Charles in his military attire, and there, inspecting the cadets. As you say, he's military commander-in-chief and is there to reward them all for their bravery and self-sacrifice. And for me, I think it's really lovely as well that a female officer, cadet, has actually won the Sandhurst Sword of Honour, which is a good thing.
And of course, we reflect that both princes passed out as cadets as well. There is that direct connection for the king.
Absolutely. And I know that there's a huge amount of pride and honour in this whole situation with King Charles. I'm not too sure whether he gave a speech or whether he's giving a speech now. And I know that the first sovereign parade in 70 years actually was conducted, I think, in December 22. King Charles didn't attend. It was actually the Duke of Gloucester. So to be now celebrating the 200th parade, to be there after the cadets have worked tirelessly for 44 weeks is great. I think 171 are becoming official officers, and I know King Charles will be presenting the new banner. And I think it's just amazing, huge congratulations to all the cadets.
Absolutely.
For winning their awards.
Yeah, and a proud day for them and, of course, their families, and all of them in an absolute step there, as we've just seen on the parade ground, as one would imagine. Thank you very much indeed, Helena, for your thoughts on that very important occasion at Sandhurst. Well, meanwhile, let's update you on the fact that a 23-year-old student, Patrick Thelwell, on trial at York Magistrates Court today after allegedly attempting to throw eggs at the King last November. He's charged with threatening behaviour contrary to the Public Order Act after allegedly launching 4 eggs at the Sovereign. All of them missed, but the student from the University of York denies the charge. Of course, we'll update you with that from York Magistrates Court now with Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley. And Anna, what have we heard in the court this morning?
Good afternoon, Mark. Well, Patrick Thelwell actually admitted during the trial this morning to throwing 5 eggs at King Charles, which came close to hitting him when the King came to visit York on November the 9th last year. He also accepted that he'd called the King a paedophile and said that the King was a friend of Jimmy Savile's, as well as shouting other profanities. He also said that the egging was the only justice victims of colonialism will get, and said that King Charles was not his king. Of throwing the eggs, he also said, "Did I get him? Next time someone will get him." But even though Patrick Thelwell admitted to throwing the eggs, he spoke in his own defence without a barrister and said that he had a legitimate defence against this, and this is why he should be found not guilty. He said that his actions were lawful and they were motivated by his desire to defend himself and others from the British state, which he labelled as fascist and tyrannical. So what's emerged from the trial so far is that Patrick Thelwell's actions were his way of showing his ideological beliefs and a way of protesting against the government, as well as showing his dislike for the monarchy. Now, court's expected to resume at 2 o'clock, where Senior District Judge Paul Goldspring will give his sentence.
OK, we'll be back to you and learn what his fate is then. Thank you very much indeed for updating us, Anne, on that hearing at York Magistrates Court, in front, of course, of the judge, as we say. Now, the 13th day of those national protests in France, protesting at the controversial pension reforms. Today, though, the Constitutional Court will rule on whether to approve the reforms. The demonstrations have been turning increasingly violent after President Macron's government tried to force the bill through Parliament last month without a vote using executive powers. It is legal, but of course has resulted in accusations of undemocratic behaviour. Let's get the latest now from Paris and freelance reporter David Chazan, who's joining us. And David, I understand that the judges involved have been given police protection ahead of this decision today.
That's right, and the entire area around the Constitutional Council, which is just opposite the Louvre Museum, is now being heavily guarded by armed police, riot police, and so it is feared that this could become a focus for protest. We are expecting the Constitutional Council to issue its ruling around 6 p.m. today, Paris time, 5 p.m. in the UK. And it could go any of three ways. They could knock back the entire bill, say it's unconstitutional. They could reject some of its provisions, or they could validate it. And the most likely scenario is that they may object to a couple of things about the bill, a couple of clauses, and keep the rest.
What's the situation then on the streets? We're seeing the pictures from these past few days, some 4,000 riot police, and well, with the batons and the riot shields, very violent scenes. And we're being told it's not just now the union members, it's students and others who are joining in these protests, not just anti-pension reform, but anti-Macron.
Yeah, that's right. Not just anti-Macron, but anti-system, anti-establishment, frankly, just about everything you can name. These are called the black blocs in France. They tend to be in their late teens and early 20s, often, strangely enough, from middle-class backgrounds. And they tend to attach themselves to almost any street protest that happens in France. And of course, street protests are a frequent feature of life here. And they come ready for trouble and they start trouble. So the union members, the sort of ordinary people, if you like, who are simply out there to register their opposition to Mr. Macron's attempt to raise the pension age from 62 to 64, are generally peaceful. But this is a sort of fringe group of anarchists or ultra-leftists, call them what you like, but they definitely come with the intention of starting trouble. And so, depending on what the Constitutional Council rules later today, the security forces are braced for potential trouble this evening and over the weekend.
And what's the indication from Macron in terms of his political stance? Of course, he's been on the world stage with that visit to China. I mean, it's unlikely he'll bend on this, we think.
No, I don't think there's any chance of him bending. The only thing that could possibly make him bend would be if the Constitutional Council said this increase in the state pension age is not in accordance with the Constitution, it's unlawful. You see, the role of the Constitutional Council is not to assess whether this is a good law or a bad law in terms of politics. It's a very technical judgment about whether it's in accordance with France's very detailed written constitution. And the Constitutional Council is composed of ex-presidents, former senior politicians. It's chaired by a former socialist prime minister, Laurent Fabius. There are also former senior civil servants and former judges who sit on it. And so the ruling will be technical rather than political, at least in principle.
David, thank you for that. And of course, we'll update people as we learn more from that court. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up here on GB News Live, well, you can take your hands off the wheel, but keep your eyes on the road. Fasten your lap straps. We'll be taking you on a ride. Stay with us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. It's GB News Live. A very good afternoon to you. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday lunchtime is last day in Ireland and a pilgrimage for Joe Biden as the president returns to his roots in County Mayo. He'll visit the Holy Shrine of Knock. We'll have the latest live as his feet bring him to where his heart is. But the president also trying to play down the international damage caused by the arrest of a 21-year-old US National Guardsman on suspicion of leaking highly classified Pentagon documents. MPs here warning the leak could have put British lives at risk. And the posh frocks and the high hats in abundance at Aintree. Yes, it's Ladies' Day, rather, at Merseyside's biggest horse racing event. The racegoers, trainers and jockeys all preparing for the big day tomorrow, the Grand National. We'll have the latest, but first, news headlines with Rory.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1 here in the GB newsroom. The Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. Nurses and other health workers have been voting over a 5% pay rise this year and a cash payment for last year. Meanwhile, Unison's ballot result is expected over the next few days. Shadow Treasury Minister James Murray says the government has not done enough to avoid industrial action.
It feels like the government hasn't really learnt anything from what's been going on over many months. When you look at the junior doctor dispute and the government's failure to negotiate with them, negotiations are about compromise, when you have the employee representatives setting out what their initial starting point is, I think people know they're not likely to get that. There is going to have to be compromise. That's the necessity of negotiation, is to make sure a compromise happens. But having that compromise, having that deal, is what is so critical about avoiding industrial action going ahead.
Staying with strike news now, and civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5 and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary described it as insulting and completely inadequate. Unions will walk out in May and June across government departments and areas like the Met Office. The King has visited Sandhurst Royal Military Academy for the 200th Sovereign's Parade. King Charles inspected the officers' cadets who have completed their commissioning. During the ceremony, which is held 3 times a year, the monarch awarded the Sword of Honour, the Overseas Sword and the King's Medal to the top officer cadets. In a speech, the King praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. Staying with royal news now, and a student is on trial after eggs were thrown at the King during a visit to York in November. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell is charged with threatening behaviour contrary to the Public Order Act. The University of York student denies the charge. Speaking ahead of his appearance, the accused said his actions were a protest against the government.
My defence is that I was acting to prevent people who suffer at the hands of the British state day in and day out because of the unlawful violence that's carried out by this state regime, which is descending into fascism in front of our eyes. But my main defence is not a legal one, it's a moral one. And then that is that my actions are those of a free person defending themselves, because we all have the right to stand up against a government that's stripping us of our rights, banning protest, and we need to stand up. And that's what my actions were.
In other news this afternoon, the US president is ending his trip to Ireland by visiting his ancestral hometown. We're looking now at live pictures. That's of Air Force One. It's preparing to depart Dublin, with Joe Biden due to travel to the west coast of the country. He is also expected to speak at a cathedral in County Mayo this evening. His ancestor sold 27,000 bricks to the building, which later helped his family to sail to America. A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It is the most serious security breach in the US in years. The government says the Prime Minister has spoken with Ukraine's president this morning to discuss further military support. Rishi Sunak has paid tribute to the efforts of the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Mr. Sunak also branded the beheading of a Ukrainian soldier circulating on social media as appalling. And the Prime Minister called on Ukraine's allies to continue to build Kyiv's strong position on the battlefield. Sir Keir Starmer reportedly spent nearly £250,000 of public money on travel expenses while he was Director of Public Prosecutions. An article in Declassified has revealed the Labour leader billed over £160,000 for a chauffeur-driven car. That's despite living 4 miles from the CPS office. His successor, Alison Saunders, who served the same 5-year term, had a travel expenses bill less than a third of the amount. Well, last month, Sir Keir said that with his Labour government, every pound would be precious. The European Space Agency is due to make a second launch attempt after its mission to Jupiter was postponed due to bad weather. The spacecraft was meant to take off yesterday to see if Jupiter's moons support life, but it will now launch at 14 minutes past 1, not far off, this afternoon. It is the ESA's first attempt to send a probe to orbit another planet's moon. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, back to Mark.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Thank you very much, Rory. Let's take you back to Ireland because Air Force One is ready there on the tarmac for another busy day as the President... I think that might be actually not the big jumbo jet. That's effectively, I think, Air Force Two. Anyway, as soon as the President goes on board, it does become Air Force One, but I think that's one of the 757s, the smaller planes, rather than the big jumbo jet. However, he's going to travel down to the west of the country for what the former Taoiseach Enda Kenny says will be an almighty welcome, because County Mayo, of course, is his ancestral roots. So President Biden travelling for a pilgrimage, effectively, a Catholic pilgrimage to the shrine at Knock, visited by Pope Francis in 2018. Also touring the sanctuary of Our Lady of Knock in County Mayo, but then a political or personal pilgrimage to Ballina, the Cathedral of St Murdoch, because his great-great-grandfather, Edward Blewett, supplied the 27,000 bricks used to build that cathedral back in 1827, which then helped the family to buy tickets for the family to travel to the United States in 1851. And I'm not sure whether we're going to see the presidential motorcade, the Beast, on its way there to, I think this might be the gates there to the security fence. So the cameraman obviously is trying to see if he can see the presidential limousine arriving in the distance. Back there, of course, as we see more on those pictures. But let's reflect that our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been following this I was going to say pilgrimage in terms of his country, but certainly there will be a pilgrimage down to Knock later. Of course, a highly significant place where Pope Francis visited in 2018. And this is something that obviously the President wanted to include on this important final day.
Yeah, I think there's a sense that Joe Biden, who's not just a kind of Irish-American president, if you like, but also a devout Catholic, would want to make a pilgrimage like this. I mean, Knock, where he's going to visit this afternoon, is up there with places like Lourdes in France in terms of the importance, if you like, in the Roman Catholic Church. It's somewhere that tens of thousands of people visit every year. It is something that when popes have come to Ireland, they have gone to before. And it is, I mean, definitively a pilgrimage for Joe Biden to go there. It is also fair to say, though, it is essentially en route, if you like, to Mayo, where this trip, this 4-day trip to Ireland, is going to culminate in Ballina, where he's going to have the chance then to finally address the Irish people directly, if you like, speaking to tens of thousands of them who are gathering in that County Mayo town later on tonight. It'll be quite a moment, and I think it'll be a reflection of how much Joe Biden, clearly and evidently, loves Ireland, but to a degree how much the Irish people really do appreciate his visits.
Yeah, we're just getting pictures, signals just interrupted, but the Beast, the Cadillac armoured limousine, has just arrived there for this short flight, which may explain why they haven't got the big 747, the jumbo jet. I think this is a Boeing 757, but of course any plane that has the President on board automatically becomes Air Force One, I think I'm correct in saying.
Indeed, yes, that is right. That's their kind of code name or the flight name when the President is on board. He's obviously got access to lots of planes. It's not a very long journey from Dublin to Knock. It's not one that one would make via plane as a normal passenger, but it is clearly the easiest and quickest way for him to travel to the west of Ireland. It's not necessarily the most accessible place on the planet. But yes, President Biden clearly enjoyed himself yesterday. You looked at those pictures from the effective state dinner, though it's not a state visit, we shouldn't say it is, but effectively they've gone as far as they almost would do for a state visit, addressing the great and good of Ireland at Dublin Castle last night, also at the Oireachtas, the joint session of the Irish Parliament yesterday. I mean, this was a man who almost feels like he's on holiday, Mark, I would suggest. He's having quite a lot of fun, clearly enjoying the warm Irish welcome, and he'll certainly have a lot more of that today. Now, that is not to say that there have been aspects of this trip that have been controversial. Clearly, there are unionists in Northern Ireland who are still pretty angry about the fact that he didn't spend an awful lot of time there, and that while his speech was in some ways well balanced. That at the same time, the fact that the Union flag wasn't flying on the beast apparently in Belfast may have upset some, or at least raised questions. And then we had that gaffe around the black and tans. But on the whole, you know what? It's been a bit like the weather. There's been off moments, but the sun has shined throughout most of it. And I think the White House will be pretty pleased with these images being back to the United States.
And as we reflect the tricolor currently on the presidential limousine, but he's going up the steps, I think, with... He's got, of course, his sister and his son, and Joe Kennedy, harking back to a previous trip, of course, to the west of Ireland and the connections with JFK back in, I think, 1963. But as you say, this has been very much a personal trip as well for the president.
Yeah, and it's one that he's been wanting to make really ever since he became president. I don't think this trip was ever in any doubt. It was one he was always going to make. But, I mean, he has been to Ireland quite a few times before. In fact, he was last here as vice president in Mayo. I mean, he went to the specific place he's going to go to this evening. It's not a big place on the west coast of Ireland. He went there in 2016 to again visit his ancestral home, to meet his long kind of distant cousins, if you like, but also to talk to the people there and to meet them and to tour around and to take selfies. He will do that again today. Listening to the people there, though, this morning, they were making a point that effectively this will be a very different visit, because it's all well and good being visited by the vice president. When you're the president of the United States, effectively the most powerful person on the planet, it's in a whole different league. And there is genuine excitement. Let's not dampen this down. There is genuine excitement in that town, as there will be in that county, and indeed across certain parts of Ireland, where people have been really, really pleased to see the President of the United States here. I say it's not necessarily universal.
Darren, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're not going to County Mayo. We are going to go to Jupiter. Sorry to butt in there mid-sentence, because we're crossing to Europe's spaceport in Kourou in French Guiana, where the European Space Agency is making a second attempt to launch the Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, JUICE for short. There is the Ariane 5 rocket that will take this pretty big payload on, the longest space trip, 4.1 billion miles, with a pack of instruments on board to visit the moons of Callista, Europa and Ganymede, with instruments developed by the Imperial College in London, all to find if there is water on those moons, because, of course, if there's water, there is the possibility of life. And they are being called Jupiter's icy moons, and they do believe that under the icy surface there could be saline seas, which, of course, could hold basic life. So instruments developed on board as it's about to take off. Engines firing.
Allumage Vulcain. Allumage AP, décollage.
And that, I think, is a successful liftoff. Just to remind you, yesterday it had to be postponed because of lightning. We've still got fairly thundery-looking clouds there, but no indications of any problems with lightning, so they've hit the button. And those motors are really firing there in French Guiana. Hugely powerful rocket. The reason being, of course, that they really have to get into deep space. Venus and Mars, sounds like the song title, have to be in perfect alignment because JUICE will perform a manoeuvre called gravitational assist when it gets higher, basically using those two planets and the gravitational pull to slingshot to Jupiter. And that 4.1 billion miles means that we won't get any answers from the surface of those moons for another 8 years. So clearly those watching that launch there won't be waiting that long to find out what we learn. But certainly it's taken off successfully on its way. The rocket tail still seen there high up in the sky.
It's an amazing sensation for you as well, I'm sure.
And thumbs up, I think. No problems being indicated. We're on our way to Jupiter, which is quite a bit further than the Moon or Mars. the most distant in the solar system. And we'll be seeing, of course, if the biggest planet supports life, or at least its moons. Let's speak now to Dr. Maggie Liu, who's astrophysicist at the University of Nottingham and host of the Space Smog YouTube channel. That was pretty spectacular. It really did fire off. And clearly they were just being a little careful yesterday because of those problems with lightning, which I think I remember nearly sort of offloaded an Apollo launch all those years ago.
Yeah, that was like a really impressive launch. And I think something that's been undercovered about this mission is that that was the last launch of Ariane 5 rocket. It's a European rocket, and it's been running since like 1996. And that's the last time it will fly. We're moving on to a newer model, Ariane 6, with future missions.
Now, we've talked much about, is there life on Mars? Now the question's being changed, is there life on Jupiter, or at least its icy moons? Just to explain to us the significance of why we're sending this pack of instruments up there.
So Jupiter and its system is actually like a mini solar system. Jupiter generates so much energy. It's even more than what it receives from the sun. So this is like enabling us to study like a kind of lab environment of our solar system, a mini version of our solar system. The moons that they've chosen are believed to have oceans beneath their icy surfaces, potentially with water. And we know that water is a key ingredient of life here on Earth. More importantly, Ganymede, which is going to be the final kind of like orbit of the JUICE mission. This planet has a magnetic field, and we know that on Earth, our magnetic field protects us from like radiation and other things in space. We know from observations that Ganymede have aurora, and that indicates that there's oxygen on Ganymede.
Right.
And again, another indicator of life. So these are like if there's life out there, that it's very likely that you'll find it on one of these icy moons of Jupiter.
OK, and this would be why we've got JMAG, I gather, a magnometer, which has been developed by Imperial College London to actually measure what you're talking about there.
During the ascent phase, the launcher is set in what we call a barbecue mode. So it's
Oh, I think we've... have we lost Maggie? Maggie, I'm going to try you again. Yes, University of Nottingham, come in. Are you receiving us? Beep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
You are. Excellent.
I can hear you.
So,
can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Maggie, I was just saying that you were talking about what they're going to try and find on these moons, and I was just reflecting that they've got a JMAG, a magnometer, on board, which has been developed by Imperial College on London. Presumably that's the instrument that's going to measure what you've just been talking about.
Yes, so the magnetometer will measure the magnetic field around Ganymede, but also Jupiter has its own magnetic field, and we'll be able to measure that. There's 10 instruments on board of JUICE, measuring everything from like the gravitational field to kind of the thermal properties, the composition, like the chemicals and elements that will be found on these moons to see if the ingredients of life are there.
And will they have to physically break through this ice crust to find if they've got this saline water or this sea underneath that could harbour elements of life?
No. So we have spectrometers that can detect different elements from afar, just from the light that's reflected off them. This is mainly an orbital mission, so it will go around the moons. I think 35 flybys of each of the moons before going into an orbital insertion of Ganymede. And then obviously its final death will be on Ganymede. So maybe it will be able to penetrate the surface, but that's not in the kind of plan.
OK, and we're going to have to be patient 8 years before we get any kind of readings back. And I guess we're also still waiting for confirmation of anything on Mars. Which is going to arrive sooner, do you think, in terms of confirmation of what may be out there? I
think, well, when we've gone to Mars in the past, we've only explored 1% of the surface. So there's a lot of Mars to explore. Like there's underground caves and lava tubes and a lot of remote places that we haven't been able to access. So there might be life on Mars, but we just haven't found it yet. There's a lot to explore. Jupiter, obviously you said it's an 8-year mission. So it's going to take a long time to get there before we can even explore anything. One of the instruments on board of JUICE is a high resolution camera. And I think it's like 2.4 meter resolution. So it's like being able to see a tennis ball at 1 kilometer away and resolve that. So you can see like quite a lot of detail, but it's not going to be able to resolve like if there's a person walking around.
But if there are tennis balls in Jupiter, that'll be good enough, of course. But thank you very much indeed for joining us with that successful launch there of Ariane 5. Thank you. And JUICE on its way. So we had one launch. Let's go for another takeoff and head back to see Air Force One, which is a slightly smaller jet than the normal 747 jumbo jet. Just to remind you, of course, that whatever plane from the US Air Force has the president on board automatically becomes Air Force One, heading from Dublin down to the west of Ireland for this visit to County Mayo with Joe Biden, of course, retracing his family's steps. Just to remind you that his, let me just get this right, his great-great-grandfather providing the bricks to actually build the cathedral there, St Muradach's Cathedral, that he'll be visiting later. Edward Blewett, and the money that the family made from that enabled, back in 1827, then enabled the family to leave Ireland in the potato famine in 1851 and head out to, yes, the United States. So a personal pilgrimage, and then I think the cameraman's trying to find the rocket there, maybe. He's a bit late for that. Anyway, we'll keep you updated, of course, on that particular visit. He'll be visiting the pilgrimage site of Knock, Our Lady of Knock in County Mayo as well, the site visited by Pope Francis, of course, back in 2018. All that to come. But let's actually update you on the fact that we are awaiting the ballot from the Royal College of Nursing as well. Will they be going back on strike as the doctors have their last day of action? We'll be looking at that in a moment. Stay with us here on GB News Live.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Air Force One has just taken off from Dublin, heading down. There it goes into the air. We've had a rocket launch. Now we've had Air Force One on its way. But it's not heading to Jupiter. It's going to the west of Ireland, down to County Mayo. President Joe Biden there on both a personal and a religious pilgrimage. As we look at these photos or the pictures coming in, let's speak once more to Gabia, the political reporter for the Irish Independent, who was updating us yesterday. And Gabby, the politics being left behind a little today. This is going to be a very personal day for Joe Biden, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I think, yesterday was quite a busy day for him in that he had the address to the houses of the Oireachtas, the Irish Parliament here. He met President Michael D. Higgins in the morning. He met with the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. In the evening, he attended a banquet in Dublin Castle. Very much so, very political, very official engagements. But today we're back to that personal side of his journey here in Ireland. He's going to Mayo, which is where he has, I think, really a lot of his relatives and those connections going back many years. He's going to be visiting the Knox Shrine, as you mentioned, rightfully. That is really something that people will go on a pilgrimage on. It's very much so a spiritual, religious visit. He's also going to be visiting the Mayo Roscommon Hospice. That is actually, I think, the only part of his trip that is going to be totally private and no media will be allowed. I presume it's to respect patients' confidentiality, among other things. He's also going to be visiting Castlebar, and he's going to be giving this public address that's quite different to the joint parliament address or the speech that he gave in Ulster University. He's going to be addressing what he feels are very much so his relatives on the ground in Mayo tonight, talking to crowds of people and sharing his memories, no doubt, of the stories that his parents have told him, as he has done in the past couple of days, but also very much reconnecting with his roots. And he's going to be getting, I think, a welcome home more so than anything else this evening.
Yeah, I think Enda Kenny, the former Taoiseach, saying it'll be an almighty welcome, bearing in mind the religious significance as well of that visit to Knock. But, I mean, it is a fascinating story where he's going to go to St Muradach's Cathedral because, as he was indicating, his great-great-grandfather, I think it's Edward Blewett, selling 27,000 bricks to the cathedral so it could be built back in 1827. And those finances helped the family then to escape the famine to head to the US in 1851.
Yeah, the stories that he has told have been quite remarkable. Everywhere that he has gone on this trip, he's had many stories, not just one. I mean, even last night, telling a story of former Taoiseach Enda Kenny, who is, of course, also from Mayo, saying how in one of the meetings that he had with Enda Kenny when he was over in Washington for St. Patrick's Day, Enda Kenny looked at Barack Obama and told him to send Joe home because he's been sending him to Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's been all over the globe. So, look, a lot of these personal anecdotes, we also heard he visited Carlingford Castle, of course, which is the last Irish landmark that his father saw before he headed off to New York. A lot of memories, a lot of stories around these parts for Joe Biden. And I think, he said yesterday in the Oireachtas, I'm at the end of my career. And I think he's in a very nostalgic, reminiscent sort of place.
Yeah.
He's seen these landmarks. He maybe hasn't seen them before at all. He hasn't seen them for many years. He's meeting people. And it's kind of, the wheel has come full circle for him, really, I think.
Yeah, but even though he's reflecting he's at the end of his career, of course, he's got another 4 years to go. That indications that he will announce perhaps officially that he's running for this second term. And, of course, these pictures will be playing out very well for many in America in terms of the Democrat vote. How is it playing out there in Ireland? What's been the response to all these pictures on the TVs and so on?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to hear him say that he's at the end of his career yesterday when he spoke in the Dáil, because if you're running for 4 more years as US president, you're obviously not the end of your career. Just thought it was an interesting comment for him to make. So it's not really clear which way he's going to go, but certainly indications pointing that he will run again against Donald Trump. Look, the visit has been largely very positive. I think people are anxious to get a glimpse of him if they're in Dundalk, if they're in Carlingford, if they're in Mayo. He hasn't been very much so out and about publicly in Dublin, so it's hard to spot him. But certainly there's people, I think, that are heading from all over the country to Mayo tonight to hear him speak. And, it really is, I think, amongst the journalists, we were counting how often do you American presidents come to Ireland. It's once every 2 decades, approximately. So it's not once in a lifetime event, but it's something that happens not very often. And because he's so connected with his Irish roots, because he's full of praise for the Irish, it's very hard to not be welcoming towards him.
Yeah, especially if you've got to wait another 2 decades. Gabia, thank you very much indeed for your response, of course, and we'll be back live to County Mayo as the President touches down to continue that 4th and final day of the presidential visit. Also coming up here on GB News Live, the doctors putting their placards down as they finish their strike actions, but could nurses be picking up theirs again? The ballot result coming up. Our reporter at the Department of Health for us will be there shortly. First, the latest headlines with Rory.
Thank you, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. The Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. Nurses and other health workers have been voting over a 5% pay rise for this year and a cash payment for last year. Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary described it as insulting and completely inadequate. A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It is the most serious security breach in the US in years. The King has visited Sandhurst Royal Military Academy for the 200th Sovereign's Parade. King Charles inspected the officer cadets who have completed their commissioning. During the ceremony, which is held 3 times a year, the monarch awarded the Sword of Honour, the Overseas Sword and the King's Medal to the top officer cadets. In a speech, the King praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. TV, online, DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick look at the markets now, and the pound, that'll buy $1.2499 and 1.305 euros. The price of gold at the moment is £1,627 and 54 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100, that's at 7,892 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss? Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the Royal College of Nursing, the RCN, set to announce the results of its ballot over how nurses have voted in the pay deal, or the offer, rather, from the government. Indications it could be rejected. The Times newspaper suggesting that vote could be 55 to 45 in terms of rejecting the offer. If that is the case, nurses could be returning to the picket lines. Around 47,000 junior doctors, of course, ending their fourth day of strike action today, but members of the RCN and also Unison, another union, considering a 5% offer for this year with a non-consolidated cash payment for last year. Well, let's get more with our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who joins us now from outside the Department of Health. And, of course, Theo, the Department of Health saying this was the final and fair offer it was going to make to the nurses.
It is indeed. Nurses could yet again be heading to the picket line. They finished voting at 9 a.m. this morning. We're expecting the result out later this afternoon, and it could mean more delays for patients who've been waiting for treatment, but also disruptions when it comes to rotas for those who are supposed to be on shift. Now, this is going to be affecting millions of people across the country. Patients, already we understand during the doctor strike that hundreds of thousands of appointments had to either be postponed or cancelled, which that strike is still taking place. And just to reiterate the deal that they have been offered under this new deal, it's a 2% one-off salary uplift, 4% recovery bonus for the current year, and a permanent 5% rise from April material. And in terms of what the RCN are saying, they're saying one close source close to the RCN saying if this happens to the RCN, we'll come out very quickly rather than taking time to consider the next steps. The mandate finishes in early May, so there isn't much time to waste. And Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, has also said this offer will give nurses, paramedics, physiotherapists and other medical staff a fair pay rise while protecting our commitment to half inflation. And that, on that point, inflation is still above 10%. Health professionals saying this isn't good enough, particularly when they're having to deal with that, but also the pressures working in the NHS. So we will see in a couple of hours whether or not they will be going on strike days again.
Yeah, and just to remind people very quickly, Theo, the RCN effectively has already taken a vote on what to do in terms of the strike action, so that could come into play pretty quickly.
That's right, yes. So essentially two things there. So again, what would this mean for patients? That's another thing people will be concerned about. But from staff, we've heard countlessly from people who work on the front line saying this has been an issue since the COVID pandemic, and it's still an issue now with the pressures they're having to deal with day in, day out. So again, you're absolutely right. This could have an impact in many different ways.
Yeah, for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you, of course, as we get the results of that ballot. As we say, no official indication yet, but it may well be rejected. Now, let's follow once more the developments on this leak of secret documents from the Pentagon. Jack Teixeira, a 21-year-old Massachusetts National Air Guardsman, arrested by the FBI on suspicion of leaking highly classified Pentagon documents. He is actually due in court in Massachusetts today, with the Pentagon indicating he was undertaking a deliberate criminal act. That's the phrase that they used. Well, among the leaked documents, assessments of the war in Ukraine and secrets about America's allies and the United Nations. Well, let's speak now to Professor Anthony Gleeson, once more security and intelligence expert at the University of Buckingham. Anthony, clearly legal process has to be gone through, but given what the Pentagon has said and the fact they're now indicating this may have gone on for some time, the intelligence community will be trying to assess what damage has been done behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I think this is a very serious matter. And, you know, GBNews is one of the first people to understand that this is a very serious matter. It raises questions of tradecraft as to what this 21-year-old chap was doing with all this highly classified stuff. But it also raises questions of statecraft, the judgments that American military intelligence officials were making. On both scores, this is extremely worrying. You know, was this guy simply an idiot? Most people seem to think at the moment that he was simply an idiot, a young fool who should not have had access to material like that. But as far as the statecraft is concerned, the judgments that US military intelligence were making, both at the time of the withdrawal from Afghanistan and now over the past year in Ukraine, seem to have been very wrong. And that will, you know, upset a lot of people, and rightly so. The final point is there's clearly somebody supplying US intelligence with important information in the Kremlin. So there will also be a huge mole hunt in Moscow. Of course, that's to our advantage. But everywhere you look, this is bad news.
Yeah, and of course embarrassment in terms of what's going on with the United Nations and so on. But just to go back to what Teixeira is going to face in court now when he appears in Massachusetts later. I mean, he's described as an intelligence officer, but effectively he seems to be an IT technician. And one wonders now whether intelligence agencies everywhere are going to reassess, you know, the ability of people to understand the import of the material they're handling.
Well, that's a very good question. Of course, the charges that are being put to Teixeira are allow him to be arraigned for being a spy under the US Espionage Act. It's very serious and potentially faces the death penalty if found guilty. But we need to know more about whether he was, you know, just an idiot, or whether the network with whom he dealt using, you know, highly encrypted chat lines to pass this stuff around, whether it was simply a group of idiotic friends like himself, or whether there was something more sinister network here, whether he was a real spy or just a fool. That he has, in effect, acted as a spy, I mean, that's entirely self-evident. So he is in big trouble, but I think the people who employed him, particularly in the 102nd Intelligence Corps in Cape Cod, which is where he worked, they will have serious questions. Well, how could this chap take documents out of the office, photograph them, and then put them on the web?
Yeah, and of course, the assessment's still being made as to what else he may have been putting out there in the social media arena. Anthony, thank you for your assessment once more. And of course, we'll update people with that court appearance a little later in Massachusetts. Now, it's Ladies' Day at Aintree. Lots of high heels and hats, but also a more serious issue being addressed because animal rights group says it plans to stage a protest at the Grand National to stop, quote, direct harm to horses. Well, Animal Rising planning to protest at Aintree, saying it's the first of events over the summer period. Yesterday, of course, the first horse at the event confirmed dead. Could it lead to yet more tighter safety measures in terms of the horse racing calendar? Well, joining us, spokesperson for Animal Rising is Alex Lockwood here in the studio. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. As we say, it's Ladies' Day today. Nothing planned today. It's actually for the race itself, the Grand National?
Nothing planned today, no. Tomorrow, we're going to be there from 9:30 in the morning. We're going to ask everyone who cares about animals and wants to stop harm to come and join us down there. And we're going to protest outside the front, perfectly legally and peacefully. And from there, we're going to see if we can disrupt the race, because we really want to stop the harm. Right,
therein lies a very important question in terms of disrupting. Could you actually do more harm than good in terms of your message, in that it could spook the horses, horses could get frightened, people could get injured?
No, not at all, because if we're going to do anything, we're going to do it before the race gets started. That's our plan. You know, we believe that people in this country are rightly worried right now about the natural world and our treatment of it, and that includes animals. And that's whether we're pumping sewage into our rivers, that's whether we're failing to support farmers in transition to more sustainable methods. And it's also about treating wonderful animals like horses as if they're money-making machines. As you said, Envoy Special died yesterday already at the Grand National meeting. There is going to be harms. And when you're putting a bet on the Grand National, you know, there are horses in that race who've got a better chance of dying than of winning, and we think that's wrong.
Aintree, of course, and the horse racing fraternity will say that they've made huge strides in terms of addressing safety. The fences have been looked at, the way that obviously the horses are prepared and trained, and they say, you know, this is a sport that the horses themselves do actually enjoy. I mean, do you take any of that on board?
We take it on board, but we don't agree with it because it's not enough. You know, a horse dies every other day in horse racing in the UK, and that's just on the tracks.
So it's not just the Grand National, and it's the sport and other racecourses.
47 horses have died in horse racing already on the tracks this year. I mean, ours is the bigger picture. We're looking at the way that animals are exploited anywhere, for entertainment or for food. You know, our campaign over this summer is to really shine a spotlight on that treatment of animals.
So the same for greyhounds then, in terms of dog
Same
racing?
for greyhounds, same for pigs in slaughterhouses, same for the chickens in those big industrial farms that are pumping the slurry into the rivers.
Yeah, obviously this is an issue about sport and the fact that there's so many are involved in that sport, and they say, you know, animal husbandry is very much top of the tree for them.
It is. It's not only about sport for us. We understand that. I mean, we want to see an end to the exploitation of any animals, particularly when they are led to their deaths, as they are in horse racing. You know, so we want to see an end to farming and fishing. We want to see a world where we've got a plant-based food system, a much more secure and sustainable food system. And what we want to see is actually freed up land, rewilded land, so all of those horses can go and run. We know horses love to run. Well, it's not necessarily to race. You know, we know that we want to see wild horses in this country, and we think we can do that. We have the solutions to do that. And it's such a shame that the only way that people can see horses when they love them so much is in these exploitative industries.
Right. What do you then say to those people? And you're unlikely to get a very receptive crowd there at Aintree tomorrow, because it's the big event for Merseyside. What do you say to those, you know, you're just spoiling their fun?
We think there are better ways to have fun on your Saturday than going to watch horses die. You know, go for a walk with your family, have a picnic. You know, if you want to bet a flutter on, put it on the lottery. There are many, many other ways to have fun in this 21st century than watch his horses break their necks jumping over fences.
Yeah, and what if, as Aintree has said, you know, they have made the sport as safe as possible. They're not actually taking the animals for granted and risking them. I mean, do you accept that there should be the ability for those who want to pursue the sport to do so?
Well, if the horses choose to, but of course they don't, do they? I mean, Envoy Special died yesterday, a 9-year-old horse. They did not get to live out their retirement. 47 horses already this year. 2,000 of the horses that end up in slaughterhouses in the UK every year, 55% of them have racing passports. You know, that is the reality of the horse racing industry, and it's very much linked to
although
the
many say they will go to studs and will live out their lives actually in
some do, but you know, but there's also the case of the jockey whistleblower who told about a stable shooting 18 young foals because they weren't productive, they weren't making any money. That, to me, you know, that's very similar to all of the industries that exploit animals. You know, like the food industry, the sport industry. We have to bring them to an end because that's not the way that we want to live as a people in this country in 2023.
Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, we'll update people with events at the National itself. Thank you very much. Now, for the first time, drivers of a Ford car will be legally able to take their hands off the wheel when driving, but keep their eyes on the road. That's the important difference. Blue Cruise technology being approved in the UK. It will control steering, acceleration and braking, but the camera will monitor the driver's eyes so they stay alert. Is it another step forward in road safety technology or a step back? Well, joining us now, broadcaster and car dealer Danny Kelly. Danny, thank you for your time. It's not full automation as you know, Ford is anxious to indicate. The driver has still got a part to play. But I'm just wondering, if you've got to keep your eyes on the road and be alert, what's the point of just taking your hands off the wheel?
Well, listen, I'm trying to be objective as possible, Mark, but I think you summed it up quite succinctly. It seems to be rather superfluous because they have cameras all around the car which will keep you equidistant to the car in front. So if that guy slows down or accelerates, then your car follows suit. It won't overtake, it won't change lanes, it just sticks to the lane. Now, technology like this has been around for 10 years, adaptive cruise control that people have on their cars. So this is the extension of adaptive cruise control. But you've hit the nail on the head, because if you don't stare out of the front window and pay attention, just like you do when you're driving with the hands on the wheel, you will get a physical shaking of the steering wheel to alert you, and you'll get some audible bleeps to tell you that you need to basically get back to driving your car. So in summary, Mark, you have to pay attention, you have to do everything to drive a car, but without your pedal on the metal or indeed your hand on the wheel. It's superfluous. Ford are very proud of it. And ironically, I think we'll find out how popular it is, because for the first 3 months of ownership, Ford will treat you to 3 months free subscription to use on over 2,300 miles of motorway. After 3 months, you've got to pay £17.99. So I think Ford will soon, after the first 3 months, find out how actually useful and popular it is.
Yeah, and just to talk about the safety aspect, I think they say they've travelled 64 million miles across the US and Canada without any accidents. But of course, we do reflect the so-called smart motorway technology here in Britain has failed in many people's eyes. That, you know, the cameras monitoring what was the safety lane, of course, not working, and the fact that many of the technology in cars don't work all the time.
Yeah, and I think that reminds us that we like to be, as a human being, as a species, we like to remain in control of our own destiny. Someone said to me the other day, well, hang on, pilots have been benefiting from hands-off controls with autopilots for years, but that's so different because you're 40,000 feet in the air and the nearest plane is going to be managed expertly by traffic control, and it's not the same as all of a sudden you having to avoid a pothole at 70 or 80 miles an hour. Now, Ford say that the technology, the cameras are so good that they'll be able to take into account things like potholes and our typical British weather. But going back to my earlier point, Mark, I think people want to be in control of cars. I think this is going to be a white elephant. I think the techies at Ford have overestimated the public outcry for, if you like, hands-free driving. I think it's a white elephant. I really do. But they're very proud of it, and we'll find out in the course of time.
OK, so not a red Mustang, a white elephant instead. Danny, thank you very much indeed for your
Very
time.
good.
And
Very good.
we'll see what emerges, of course, on the motorways. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up here on GB News Live, the very latest from Ireland. Air Force One has touched down after a very short flight. We'll be following the President on his visit to the west of Ireland. All that coming up. Stay with us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's just coming up to 2 o'clock. You're watching GB News Live with me, Mark Longhurst. And let's update you with the President in Ireland because he has now arrived in, yes, that is the west of Ireland because it's raining and the clouds. No sunshine as we saw in Dublin's Fair City. He is in Knock to make this visit both a personal and a religious pilgrimage. Just to remind you that he will be travelling to the pilgrimage site beloved by Catholics, including Pope Francis in 2018, the Shrine of Knock, and then later to St Muradach's Cathedral in County Mayo there, where his great-great-grandfather, Edward Blewett, sold 27,000 bricks to build the cathedral in 1827. and the money the family made helped them then to leave Ireland in 1851 during the famine to travel to the United States. So it's a very personal visit for the President today, but also indications that he will be visiting all the sites that have been so important to his family, including also, we're being told, a hospice, because that's in the name of his son who died from a brain tumour. That will be a very personal visit. The cameras won't be allowed to follow that. So we'll have all that coming up for you live. But as, of course, the President is in Ireland, elsewhere, a 21-year-old US Air National Guardsman arrested on suspicion of leaking highly classified Pentagon documents will be appearing in court in Massachusetts. MPs here warning that leak could put British lives at risk. More reaction coming up to that shortly. Plus, the King meeting Army cadets at the 200th Sovereign's Parade this morning, telling officers that both his sons were Sandhurst alumni. Officers and gentlemen both, despite what we've been hearing in various books with Prince Harry. So the King obviously honouring all those cadets at this passing out parade. Scientists at the University of Southampton warning that flash droughts, whatever they are, could soon become the new normal, not flash floods. They're blaming human-based climate change. Their frequency going to accelerate, they say, as the temperatures continue to rise. We'll be turning the dial up on that. First, though, let's get the latest news headlines with Rory.
Thank you very much, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. The Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. If they voted to reject the 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year, it will be a further blow to the health sector. Junior doctors have been staging industrial action, joining picket lines for the fourth consecutive day. Shadow Treasury Minister James Murray says the government has not done enough to avoid industrial action.
It feels like the government hasn't really learnt anything from what's been going on over many months. When you look at the junior doctor dispute in there and the government's failure to negotiate with them, negotiations are about compromise. When you have the employee representatives setting out what their initial starting point is, I think people know they're not likely to get that. There is going to have to be compromise. That's the necessity of negotiation is to make sure a compromise happens. But having that compromise, having that deal, is what is so critical about avoiding industrial action going ahead.
Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary described it as insulting and completely inadequate. Unions will walk out in May and June across government departments and areas like the Met Office. The US President is ending his trip to Ireland today by visiting his ancestral hometown. These are live pictures, which we'll see in just a moment. There we go, from County Mayo, where Joe Biden has just arrived on Air Force One. He's expected to speak at a cathedral later today. His ancestor sold 27,000 bricks to that building, which later helped his family to sail to America. The government says the Prime Minister has spoken with Ukraine's president this morning to discuss further military support. Rishi Sunak has paid tribute to the efforts of the Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. Mr. Sunak also branded the beheading of a Ukrainian soldier circulating on social media as appalling. And the Prime Minister called on Ukraine's allies to continue to build Kyiv's strong position on the battlefield. The King has visited Sandhurst Royal Military Academy for the 200th Sovereign's Parade. King Charles inspected the officer cadets who have completed their commissioning. During the ceremony, which is held 3 times a year, the monarch awarded honours to the top officer cadets. In a speech, the King praised the UK's role as a leading nation in delivering training, equipment and advice to Ukraine. Staying with royal news now, and a student is on trial after eggs were thrown at the King during a visit to York in November. 23-year-old Patrick Thelwell is charged with threatening behaviour contrary to the Public Order Act. The University of York student denies the charge. Well, speaking ahead of his appearance, the accused said his actions were a protest against the government.
My defence is that I was acting to prevent people who suffer at the hands of the British state day in and day out because of the unlawful violence that's carried out by this state regime, which is descending into fascism in front of our eyes. But my main defence is not a legal one, it's a moral one. And then that is that my actions are those of a free person defending themselves, because we all have the right to stand up against a government that's stripping us of our rights, banning protest, and we need to stand up. And that's what my actions were.
A US airman suspected of leaking highly classified documents will appear at a court in Massachusetts later today. 21-year-old Jack Teixeira was arrested by the FBI yesterday after allegedly sharing highly sensitive government information, which was later posted on a social media site. It is the most serious security breach in the US in years. Sir Keir Starmer reportedly spent nearly £250,000 of public money on travel expenses while he was Director of Public Prosecutions. An article in The Classified has revealed the Labour leader billed over £160,000 for a chauffeur-driven car. That's despite living 4 miles from the CPS office. His successor, Alison Saunders, who served the same 5-year term, had a travel expenses bill less than a third of that amount. A range of handmade chinaware commemorating the upcoming coronation has gone on sale. The products have been made in the potteries in Stoke-on-Trent to mark the celebration on May the 6th. The collection features designs including oak leaves, emblems of the 4 nations of the UK and Charles III's cipher. The profits will go to the Trust for the Care and Conservation of the Royal Collection. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now though, it's back to Mark.
Rory, thank you very much indeed. Now, let's just reflect. It's the 13th day of those national protests in France with the government's controversial pension reforms. Now, today, the top constitutional court in Paris to rule on whether to approve the reforms. So demonstrations turning violent since Macron's government forced the bill through Parliament last month without a vote, using those executive powers. Legal, but it's resulted in accusations, of course, of undemocratic behaviour. And today it's resulted in the constitutional judge being placed under police protection, we're being told. Let's get more now with Charles-Henri Gallois, leader of France's Génération Frexit group, joining us. Thank you very much indeed for your time once more, Charles-Henri. And just to update us on the significance of this constitutional council, as it is, I mean, this could really stop the process in its tracks.
I mean, if it judges only on legality, it could be rejected, because it's not only that they have used Article 49.3, it's during all the process, during the parliamentary debate, during the Senate way as well, they use all the tools that they could to shorten as well the debates, and they finish, as you explained, forcing the law without a vote. So if you take it in a nutshell, the Constitutional Court could reject it. Yet there is an ambiguity, and the people in France are not very confident, because let's say that the Constitutional Court in France, it's not a law professional, it's not lawyers inside, it's former politicians that have been appointed by Macron or by former governments. And the former governments, yes, they are all pro-EU, they are all in favor of this pension reform. So the people are, they think that maybe they won't judge the law, but they will do it more in a political way and let Macron pass his reform. So that's the main point. And normally we should know it at 6 p.m. French time.
OK, and hence, I guess, why those judges have been placed under police protection. But, I mean, we gather that the police are outside the council, the Constitutional Council as well, bearing in mind the scenes that we've seen there on the streets of Paris. I mean, what is the atmosphere like there at the moment?
I think it's a bit quiet, but maybe you can have a turmoil after the announcement at 6. So far it's very quiet. It's raining in Paris. You don't have many people in the streets. But you can imagine that if the Constitutional Court say yes to the pension reform, there could be definitely turmoil after the announcement. So we are expecting what will happen.
And it seems now to be going beyond the trade unionists and the students. There are others joining these protests. I mean, are political points also being made? Suggestions, of course, that the far left are involved in many of these protests.
I mean, you have some far left violent groups, but if you take the strikes widely, it's normal people, it's trade unions, it's massive protest. Sometimes it's more than 1 or 2 million people in the streets. So it's massive protest, and it goes beyond that. But of course, the media and the images are quite impressive when you've got violence. So they focus more on this far left groups that are doing violence against the police, or even some part of the police. Also, there has been some violence. Sorry, it's very focusing on that. But let's say that on the overall, the French people are against this reform. If you look at the polls, it's 73% of the French people are against this reform. So it's a massive protest against it, and yet Macron is doing and behaving like undemocratically. So it can be very intense during the next hours.
And has anything been seen or heard of Macron? Because, of course, the president was in China on that state visit, and he seems to have been keeping his counsel since then.
No, I mean, Macron is pretending pretending he can move on and nothing happened. But if you look at the reality, politically, he does not have any legitimacy, and he was doing like with the people in China, but it's easier with the Chinese Communist Party, and everything is controlled. In France, he cannot go outside without massive protection. He has to go to Notre Dame today. They have evacuated all the neighborhood, everything. So Macron, he cannot go through France. It's a massive, let's say, massive protest against Macron.
Yeah. Fortress Elysee Palace, in other words, in terms of
it's a bit of fortress, and it's like like the Russian imperatrice. When you say the Potemkin villages, it's like the same Macron. When he goes to one part, they evacuate everything, and French people love me. But if you look at the reality, he cannot do 1 foot outside without people protesting. So politically, it's very, very hard for him.
Charles-Henri, as ever, thank you for updating us with the position there. And, of course, we'll see what happens with that Constitutional Council a little later. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's return now to the west of Ireland and the Ireland West Airport, Knock, where Air Force One has landed. There it is. It is a Boeing 757, not that big jumbo jet, because any US Air Force plane that carries the president automatically becomes Air Force One. So it's actually taxiing there on the runway. As you can see, the rain clouds and the wind have greeted him to the west of Ireland, leaving behind the sunshine of the fair city of Dublin. That's a closer shot. Well, there's a bit of blue sky, so I shouldn't maybe give you too detailed a weather forecast on the conditions in the island. But clearly, this is going to be a day when the president wants to be out and about. Just to remind you that on the itinerary today, he will be visiting the Sanctuary of Our Lady at Knock in County Mayo, the pilgrimage site, of course, where Pope Francis visited back in 2018. He will then be also receiving, as former Taoiseach Enda Kenny says, an almighty welcome as he tours County Mayo, because that's where his family originated, and indications, of course, that the connection with St Muiredax Cathedral in particular in the County Mayo there. His great-great-grandfather, Edward Blewett, selling the cathedral 27,000 bricks in 1827, which helped to build the cathedral. And indeed, the money that the family made then helped them to buy tickets to leave Ireland in 1851 during the famine and travel, yes, to the United States. So clearly this is very important personally for President Biden. but indications too that he's still cognizant of the political significance of all this. Deputy Prime Minister Michael Martin indicating that his remarks last night at Dublin Castle that the UK should work more closely with Ireland to support the North was an exhortation, he said, for everyone to cooperate, and an indication that the President is very aware of the fine line he has to tread. But in addition, the White House press corps, I suspect, will want to question him on the court hearing in Massachusetts. Just looking to see if we've got a time on that, but this is the consideration of the US airman or the National Guardsman Jack Teixeira, who will be appearing in court in connection with this leak of highly classified military documents about Ukraine war and other national security issues. Teixeira arrested by the FBI at his home in Massachusetts on Thursday, an indication that he had been leaking classified information onto the web, or at least to a chat room, for many months. Let's speak now to Professor of US Politics at University College in Dublin, Scott Lucas. Scott, I was just saying, today's slightly different complexion in terms of the personal links, but that the politics still dogging him, of course.
Well, I'm not sure if it's politics dogging him, Mark, as much as going on the front foot in terms of making some very important political statements. I think the visit to Belfast earlier this week was extremely important in Biden saying, look, it's not the U.S. place to impose anything upon the parties in that area, but that the U.S. would like to support the return to governance, would like to support the return to power sharing. I think that's a very important message for everyone, whether you're in Northern Ireland, the rest of the UK, or in the Republic of Ireland. He then went to Dublin, and as you mentioned, he made a couple of very important statements talking about the importance of today's responsibilities and of the future its possibilities. He said, look, we want the UK to work more closely together with Ireland in terms of a common economic future, a common political future. You know, we finally got a bit of movement over the Northern Ireland Protocol, where the Johnson government's attempts to undermine that protocol had really caused damage with Washington. The Sunak government and the EU working together, I think, have created a little bit more of a way forward. Look, let's settle the situation. And now when we settle the situation, we can talk about how the U.S. can work together, both with Ireland as part of the EU and work with the UK, which happens to be outside that organization.
Yeah, and Michael Martin observing that he believed, or many people believe, this was an exhortation for everyone to cooperate.
Oh, it is. And now, in terms of the U.S.-Ireland links, and, you know, I was just in Dublin on Wednesday. The atmosphere there has been absolutely superb. It's been very receptive. U.S.-Irish relations are on and up. And they're on and up, quite frankly, because Ireland has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It continues to rise despite dealing with issues like housing, public services, and Northern Ireland, which of course is part of the UK. The hope there is that once you get stable government there, it benefits from investment from Ireland, from the UK, and also from the US. So that type of a shared economic future rather than one of confrontation, absolutely a watchword for what Biden's been doing this week.
Yeah, and an indication, of course, that address at Ulster University, this was the carrot being dangled in terms of extra US investment that could triple GDP, as he said. But, of course, the sensitivity is still very much at play. The observations that the beast, the presidential limousine, was not carrying the Union flag in the north, but it's been carrying the tricolour down here in the Republic.
Well, I think if you talk to anyone in Northern Ireland from across the spectrum, you could talk about where the question of the Union Jack in Northern Ireland at a time when we've got one major unionist party, which is boycotting the assembly, which means it hasn't been able to operate for more than a year. I think the worry there is that people will use that question of the Union Jack to try to deflect from the very real issues that involve all parties out there. So I treat that as a bit of white noise in terms of what Biden was doing, rather than dealing with the substance of the visit.
So you don't think it was a deliberate display then?
No, it's not a deliberate display. You know, for example, you talk about the fact that the DUP was making its own statement in that they would not be pictured alongside with Biden and the other parties while they continue their boycott. And you take the U.S. fundamental point, which is it is not for us to come in and tell people what to do. You've got to get the parties within Northern Ireland to decide to do that for the common good.
Now, the other consideration is, of course, that all these pictures, particularly today with his links back to his origins in the west of Ireland, and we remember the days of JFK back in 1963, this will play very well back in the States, particularly with the Democratic ticket for the 2024 presidential election campaign, we guess.
Well, I think sometimes that's a little bit overstated because the Irish-American community no longer votes as a bloc. Since the 1960s, quite a few Irish Americans have moved towards the Republican side. I do think that it will play well with those 30 million Americans who still claim to be of Irish heritage. But I think the broader message here has been one of American responsibility. And that has been responsibility, for example, in terms of the role in the Good Friday Agreement, the role in continuing to promote the Good Friday Agreement as part of an American foreign policy, which includes working together with the UK against the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So that idea of competence and responsibility, you hope it plays not only with Irish American voters, but indeed with voters who don't happen to come from the Irish Republic.
Yeah, and I guess it won't hurt to see these scenes of a successful international statesman on the world stage, bearing in mind, of course, the worries about the gaffes or him tripping up or down aircraft steps, and all the questions about his cognitive abilities at the age of 80.
As he comes down those steps and waves to the crowd, think about the fact that this man has done a 4-day visit across Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, has given a whole series of speaking engagements. The speech to Irish Parliament in Dublin Castle last night, very, very well received. He's looking energized. He's energized in part because of the personal links you talk about, but it's also because of the fact that the idea of Sleepy Joe always was a convenient myth for certain other politicians to promote.
Yeah.
That's not a sleepy guy. That's a guy running for president in 2024 who thinks, and I think with justification, he's doing pretty well on both the domestic and international fronts.
And as he reflected, with age comes wisdom, indicating perhaps he's at the end of his career. But, there's another 4 years to go, perhaps. And therefore, he's thinking very much on his feet about what will play well.
He's running. I mean, he's going to run for president in 2024. Okay. So let's reassure everybody that that's going to happen. They'll make the formal declaration of candidacy later in the year. But what you're going to see Biden doing is, and you saw him doing it during the domestic turmoil with Donald Trump being indicted. You'll see it over the spy, the spy case you've been talking about. And Intelligence League says, look, we get to the fundamentals here. We have to govern responsibly and competently. We have to get away from the notion of division. And whether we're talking about Americans working together or about people of different countries working together, again, today, common responsibilities, future shared possibilities. So expect what he's saying in Ireland today to be carried on over the next 19 months before we get to the next U.S. election.
And indeed, he made direct reference, of course, in that speech in the University of Ulster about the 6th of January and what happened on Capitol Hill. Do you think that Trump, watching these scenes on screens in the US, will be gnashing his teeth?
Well, he's been throwing stuff at the screen. He went on Truth Social, which is his media platform. Not as big as Twitter, so not a lot of people noticed it. But then he simply bashed Biden, started shouting about World War III. And then he went on Fox News with his friend Sean Hannity and just railed for most of an hour. That's what Trump does. Trump doesn't like it when anyone else gets attention. He certainly doesn't like it when Joe Biden gets attention, especially attention as the president of the United States.
Yeah.
Whether or not folks are listening to Trump, we can hold that for a different conversation. Fact is right now is the focus right now is on Joe Biden. But again, I have to emphasize, it's on more broadly a U.S.-Irish relationship, which is progressing very, very well, and a U.S.-UK relationship, which needs to move forward as well. Because let me remind you what was said in 2016 by a predecessor of Joe Biden, Barack Obama. It's not that Barack Obama or Joe Biden were anti-UK in 2016, but Barack Obama said before the referendum, look, the UK's choice, they'll decide what to do regarding the EU. But if they adopt Brexit, they go to the back of the queue. The UK made that choice to go to the back of the queue economically, and somehow we've got to find a way in the UK to get back towards the front of the queue.
Yeah, and as you indicate, that was Obama, not Biden. But just to talk, we're talking about Trump. What about the Republican strategists? Now, we've got this story about this US National Guard airman, Jack Teixeira, who will be appearing in court in Massachusetts this afternoon. We expect, obviously, the White House press pack with the president to try and bowl some questions towards him on that. We assume, obviously, that the Republican strategists will be also wanting to make the most of this in terms of this presidential race we're about to get kicking off.
Now, the problem for the Republicans is they can't really do that because the problem has been one which has been building up for years. 1.25 million American personnel now have access to classified documents. Many of them can get access to secret and top secret documents. That's a system that was not one that Joe Biden put in place.
Yeah.
It's one that's sort of grown and grown. What you're going to have to see from the Biden administration, U.S. government, is a full review of that system. And if they carry that review out competently, then it reinforces the idea, yeah, we're the guys that can govern here. But I think the big thing here is, before you reassure the American voters, and whatever Republican strategists say, is you've got to reassure American allies. And that is not really the specifics on the cases like the Ukraine war or cases like Egypt or Israel, which have come up. It is that you will be protective of sources of intelligence, whether it's human intelligence, whether it's electronic intelligence, whether it's signals intelligence. In other words, you can trust the United States not to spill secrets. So that message will have been made, by the way, in conversations with Rishi Sunak this week, as well as with the Irish and with other governments. I think that this case is a serious breach of U.S. intelligence, but it's not as serious as WikiLeaks. It's not as serious as the Edward Snowden case. So I think we'll get over it within the next few weeks.
Yeah, and clearly Biden was indicating outside the official residence in Phoenix Park that he didn't think it was that damaging because it wasn't contemporaneous. But clearly bridges are going to have to be built in terms of rebuilding confidence in the intelligence community behind the scenes.
Yeah, so to break down what he meant by it's not contemporaneous, the latest documents in the set that was released was from early February. And it's the nature on a lot of the crises that those documents cover, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's China, whether it's the Ukraine war, that events have moved on even by April. So it's not like those documents, in other words, blow open doors in terms of military political planning as it stands right now. What you've referred to is the more serious issue, and that is, look, when you're an intelligence service, you have to make sure that your sources are protected. You have to make sure that when you have conversations with allies, that those do not become exposed when you're dealing with sensitive topics. So it's the methods of intelligence that you're already seeing American officials, the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, they are already speaking behind closed doors and in public to try to give those necessary reassurances.
Scott, thank you very much indeed. As the president, it's not the Beast this time, it is another pretty heavily armoured SUV. With the Secret Service detail there. President Joe Biden having been met by various dignitaries, including Transport Minister Eamon Ryan, TD for Mayo, Dara Calleria, and also, of course, Hunter Biden, his son and sister Valerie Biden Owens in that presidential party. So they're on their way now in terms of the visit to the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Knock, the Catholic pilgrimage site, then the North Mayo Heritage and Genealogical Centre Family History Research Unit, because clearly the family connections in County Mayo are very important to the president. And then the public address at the cathedral in Ballina, the town where his ancestors came from in terms of St Muradux Cathedral. His great-great-grandfather providing the 27,000 bricks to build that cathedral in 1827. Edward Blewett then using that money eventually in 1851 to buy tickets for the family to leave Ireland in the potato famine and head, yes, to the United States, where that sort of story began for Joe Biden. So we've got the presidential SUV. I don't know quite what they call it. It's not the Beast anyway, but it's on the move with the rest of the presidential motorcade heading out with, well, a bit of blue sky there because the weather's been pretty changeable there in the west of Ireland, as one might expect, with the sun having been left behind in Dublin, but it's starting to peek through there on the clouds. The White House press pack and other reporters in those buses following. So we'll keep you updated on that as that presidential visit continues. But our thanks to Scott there. Let's just bring you some breaking news that we're getting from York, from the Magistrates' Court there. And we can tell you that Patrick Thelwell has now been found guilty of threatening behaviour after throwing at least 5 eggs at the King during the royal walkabout in York Minster in November last year. That's just coming through. It was a circuit judge who was hearing that particular case. Thelwell seen outside that court earlier, indicating that he wanted the message to be delivered, did you vote for him? And indications that it was a wider protest than just the royal family. But he has now been found guilty of threatening behaviour after throwing at least 5 eggs at the King. We await sentence. We'll update you with that. But let's get an update now on all the other headlines of the day, and Rory's waiting for us.
Thank you, Mark. The latest from the GB newsroom. The Royal College of Nursing is set to announce the results of a ballot on the government's latest pay offer. If they voted to reject the 5% pay rise this year, as well as a cash payment for last year, it will be a further blow to the health sector. Junior doctors have been staging industrial action, joining picket lines for the 4th consecutive day. Meanwhile, civil servants will hold fresh strikes after the government announced a pay rise of between 4.5% and 5%. The PCS union's General Secretary described it as insulting and completely inadequate. Unions will walk out in May and June across government departments in areas like the Met Office. A mother and father have been found guilty of the murder of their baby son on Christmas Day. Stephen Bowden and Shannon Marsden inflicted repeated acts of severe violence on their 10-month-old boy Finlay. 71 bruises and 57 fractures were found on his body. Finlay had only been placed back in their care for 39 days before he was killed. That's despite social workers asking for a longer transition period. The US president is ending his trip to Ireland today by visiting his ancestral hometown. We're looking now at Air Force One, which took off earlier from Dublin. Joe Biden has just arrived in Mayo. He's expected to speak at a cathedral later today. His ancestor sold 27,000 bricks to that building, which later helped his family to sail to America. TV, online, DAB+, radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the latest daily intelligence briefing from the Ministry of Defence has indicated that Ukrainian forces have been withdrawing from some parts of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region because of a renewed Russian assault with artillery. Moscow has been trying to capture that area, of course, for 9 months, still pressing to achieve victory before Ukraine can launch what may be an expected counter-offensive. Let's speak now to the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, who can join us live from Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Poroshenko, for joining us once more, because I understand you've been to the front line in Kherson, elsewhere, to assess the situation. What have you learned there today?
Yeah, I returned back from the south of Ukraine, from the front line, only this morning. And I see that, first of all, we have a better preparation for our assault operation. We still have a lack of ammunition. We're still waiting the armed personal carrier. We start to receive the first tank, which is very positive, and this is definitely create the preparation on the final stage. For the Bakhmut, I will be there next week and nearby, because this is the hell in Bakhmut. This is the no man. This is the destroyed all the city, and this is the symbol of Ukrainian resilience for the line not 9 but 10 months. And this is the small city which Putin promised 10 months ago to capture, and only the ability of Ukrainian armed forces, decisiveness of Ukrainian soldiers, and partnership with our partners, because behind me, this is the DAF truck which we received, which we bought in Great Britain, and I want to thank the British government and British people who organized for us ability to purchase, and more than 300 trucks, artillery trucks, now plan to be delivered immediately to the armed forces to make our assault operation more efficient. And we call to all the partners, please accelerate, supply the weapons, supply ammunition to our troops. This is a decisive factor.
Well, we understand that Rishi Sunak spoke to President Zelensky this morning. There was a phone call and President Zelensky updating Number 10 on the situation on the battlefield. But I think the indication is that obviously Britain will supply army. What is it that you need desperately? Because we heard obviously in this security leak in the United States that you may be running short of things like anti-aircraft missiles.
First of all, about security leak. This is what Russian expected, that this is make us several purposes. Point number one, they can attack the unity of the world for supporting Ukraine. We don't allow them any tiny chance. Second, they want to postpone the offensive operation of Ukrainian troops. We try to do our best not to give them these results. And the final point is that for us, top priority is ammunition. In Bakhmut, the Russian artillery has a slow success just because we have a lack of ammunition for Ukrainian artillery. Point number two, I want to thank the European Union for yesterday's decision to give €1 billion for supplying the ammunition for 155 NATO artillery. And as far as I understand, before the 31st of May, this ammunition already would be in Ukraine. And point number 3, this is the 21st of April. It would be new Lunchtime meeting, and we are expecting there anti-aircraft missiles, long-range missiles. But those, what Zelensky speak today with Sunak, is to deliver to us the F-16. This is the fighters who can stop the Russian dominance in Ukrainian sky and who can make more successful Ukrainian defense and Ukrainian offensive operation. I definitely confident that we hear this, the F-16 start to be, and long-range missile start to be the game changer and one of the important factor for our future offense. Definitely we should keep together.
OK. Now, the other consideration that I think the Prime Minister and the President spoke about was this video that's been seen on social media and the beheading of a Ukrainian soldier. What is your personal reaction to what has been seen?
This is not just my personal reaction. This is me, we, and the whole world shocked with the latest proofs that Russian atrocities in Ukraine. Russia had demonstrated that they have no difference between a Russian terroristic state and IGIL. And this is thousands of these disasters happen in Ukraine during the last year. I was among the first Ukrainian soldiers who come to Bucha and see with my own eyes the streets which was full of the dead people, without heads, without hands. Yesterday, it was official statement of the mayor of Mariupol, and he said that significantly more than 25,000 civilians only in Mariupol were killed. Significant number were tortured. And this has only one name, the genocide. And I want to call to all our partners, to the ICC, to the court in Hague, that not only because of the capture of Ukrainian children, but also for this genocide of Ukrainian people, the Putin, his circle, the leadership of his army, and the executor of this disastrous terrorism act should be responsible with the international court. We should never let to repeat it again. And definitely, these crimes seen by Ukrainian soldiers, and this is giving even more motivation just to stop what Russia demonstrates as a Ruski Mir, Russian world. This is what Putin want to bring to my nation. And another positive thing is that most probably this happened in the private military campaign Wagner Group. And the fact that yesterday it was a decision of European Council to recognize this Wagner Group as a terroristic organization responsible for this genocide. This is also additional step to the responsibility of Russia.
And do you still believe that Putin will be actually made to stand trial in the International Court in The Hague? Do you think that they will be able to bring him to justice?
This is one of the key factors, not only for Ukraine, for the continent, maybe for the world, about the responsibility for the military crime. This I can promise me, my team, and Ukrainian people and Ukrainian armed forces do maximum we can for bring him behind the bar in Hague, because this is the act of justice. Because Putin, without this justice, without justice, it would be no victory. But I have no doubt about our victory, our common victory, because we need to have for our victory deputinization of Europe, deputinization of Russia, and at the end of the day, deputinization of the world. Without that, sustainable security situation is still under question.
Petro Poroshenko, former president of Ukraine, thank you for joining us live in Kyiv once more and bringing us your story here on GB News. We do appreciate it. Thank you. And, of course, we'll update you on, as we said, the discussions taking place between Number 10 and also President Zelensky, as we said, that telephone call taking place this morning. Well, let's update you now on that breaking news that we were carrying from the court of Patrick Thelwell, aged 23, being found guilty at York Magistrates Court in front of a district judge of threatening behaviour after throwing, quote, at least 5 eggs at the King during the royal walkabout at York Minster in November last year. Joining us now, our royal reporter Cameron Walker. And Cameron, of course, we reflect, you were actually there reporting at that time. What's the court heard now this morning?
I was. So it was the 9th of November that just outside Micklegate Bar, where the King was expected to do a walkabout. But as he greeted the dignitaries who had assembled, 5 eggs were thrown in the direction of the King. All 5 of them missed, but it meant that, of course, the crowd who had assembled to potentially greet the King could not, because he was very quickly rushed on, as with the Queen consorts, for their own safety, away from what we now know is Patrick Thelwell, who has been found guilty this afternoon at York Magistrates Court. So his defence was basically saying it was lawful violence and were part of legitimate protests to do with the establishment and the historical links that the British monarchy allegedly has to the historical slave trade. But he was charged and has now been found guilty with a Section 4 public order offence relating to that egg-throwing incident on the 9th of November, and also for using threatening and abusive words or behaviour. He did shout, "This country was built on the blood of slaves."
Yeah, and in addition to the eggs, and as we reflect at the time, of course, they did miss the King. However, the intent was there. And also the fact that he shouted, "Friends with Jimmy Savile, the King is a paedophile," as well. So therefore, Chief Magistrate or Senior District Judge Paul Goldspring saying that Thelwell intended to cause King Charles to believe that immediate unlawful violence would be used against him. So a Section 4 public order offence, low-level violence, but basically this was, a serious matter.
It was a serious matter. It could have hurt the King. It could have hit the King. But from looking at the pictures outside of court, it looks to me as if perhaps, and you see the pictures of the protest signs, he clearly had some supporters there with him. He decided to speak to reporters outside of court to state his case. Clearly, this has got a lot of publicity for his cause, as it were. We don't know yet what punishments, if any, the judge will hand down to Patrick Thelwell. He is 23 years old. He is a student at the University of York. But all of this has happened just a couple of weeks since the King expressed his support for the Royal Archives being open to a PhD student at the University of Manchester to look into potential links of historical slavery with the British monarchy.
And the payment, I think, with Edward Colston, who was the Bristol slave trader. But equally, I mean, a lot of historians reflecting that there was then in the Victorian era an effort by the royal family to actually democratise, if that's the correct word, the slave trade. But this is obviously significant because after this event in York, there are all sorts of questions then about the King's approach with these walkabouts and making himself so open to the public and shaking hands. And, of course, we saw the scenes in Germany, remember, and what that may mean in the future. It doesn't seem that he's been cowed by this in any way. I mean, he's still making himself very available publicly.
Oh, absolutely. On the day itself, literally a couple of hours afterwards, the King made a point of doing another walkabout in a nearby town, greeting the public just to show he wasn't afraid of that kind of potential incident happening. And then, of course, another egg incident happened a few weeks later in Luton, where a Harry May, who's 21, was fined £100 and ordered to pay £85 for an egg attack on the King in December. But clearly security is always an issue. And for the King to be personable, to be perhaps more in touch with the British public, it is something clearly he feels he needs to do, but he's also not afraid of the potential of an attack. But he's got a lot of security around him. The court heard how today in York, how there were plainclothes police officers in the grounds near Thelwell, as one might expect, who were the people to initially grab him before uniformed officers could arrive. Clearly, they have their own personal protection officers as well, senior members of the royal family. There's a big security presence at these events.
Yeah. Cameron, thank you for that. But let's actually now head back to the Magistrates Court. Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley has been there following events. Anna, just update us on what's being said there.
Yes, well, the Chief Magistrate Senior District Judge Paul Goldspring found the defendant guilty of the charge, saying that Thelwell intended to cause King Charles to believe immediate unlawful violence would be used against him. We're still awaiting that sentence to come through just now, and we'll give that update when we have it. But it was certainly ideological from what I took from hearing what Patrick Thelwell was saying in court. He represented himself. He didn't have a solicitor or a barrister. He pleaded his own case. He admitted to what he'd done. He admitted to throwing the eggs. He admitted to calling the king a paedophile and saying that he was a friend of Jimmy Savile's, along with other profanities. But he was claiming that in his defence he was doing this as a protest against the state and the monarchy linked to this. And this is what he had to say on the steps of the court this morning before he headed into the trial.
Thank you. Right, guys, hi. So today, the main issues of the trial are that I am being accused of threatening and violent behaviour that caused to interfere in lawful violence. My defence is that I was acting to prevent people who suffer at the hands of the British state day in and day out because of unlawful violence that's carried out by this state regime, which is descending into fascism in front of our eyes. But my main defence is not a legal one, it's a moral one. And then that is that my actions are those of a free person defending themselves, because we all have the right to stand up against a government that is stripping us of our rights, banning protest, and we need to stand up. And that's what my actions were. They were small, and they're not what's going to make the difference. What's going to make the difference is people like us coming together and changing things in our local communities with direct democracy, and rejecting that parliamentary democracy is the only way that we can govern ourselves in this country, because we can choose to do things differently. And so thank you.
So yes, Patrick Thelwell there saying that the government's oppressive and tyrannical, and that was part of why he threw those eggs at the king.
To you, of course, as we find out what that Chief Magistrate will be sentencing him to. But Anna, thanks for braving that in the rain outside York Magistrates Court there. We'll update you, of course, as we get more. But let's head now to the west of Ireland and Knock, where we saw Air Force One landing. Just to remind you, it's not the big jumbo 747. It is the plane that's carried him from Dublin. Any plane, of course, US Air Force plane with the president on board has the moniker of Air Force One. He spent a few minutes on the tarmac with his sister Valerie Biden-Owens, greeted by the various dignitaries. It's good to be back, he said, as he began to shake hands with those there to greet him, because this is a very personal visit for him. It's where his family originated from in County Mayo. Now, the former Irish President, Mary Robinson, had told President Biden at Dublin Castle last night about the famous light in the window at the official residence in Dublin. The light, a symbolic beacon lighting the way for Irish emigrants and their descendants to welcome them home to their homeland. So Mary Robinson indicating this an important symbol for the Irish diaspora. And I think this is now the visit of the shrine now in Knock. So it's obviously a religious as well as a personal pilgrimage. Just to remind you, this is where the Pope visited in 2018, the site, the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Knock in County Mayo, where it's believed a vision of the Virgin Mary was seen, and a very holy site for Catholic pilgrims. And the President wanting really to make that personal visit there, as well as to the cathedral later, St Murdoch's Cathedral in County Mayo, in Ballina, where, of course, his great-grandfather, or great-great-grandfather, I should say, was partial to the building, with some 27,000 bricks being supplied for that cathedral in 1827. So religion very much part of this story today, but the politics still as well, because as we were saying in terms of Mary Robinson's reflections, that the whole issue of this light shining and the image for the diaspora, part of the political picture, that they hope, obviously, that things will move on in terms with the relations with the United States and its relations with the UK over the north of Ireland. And we understand that Mary Robinson will read a poem about Irish emigration ahead of the President's final speech tonight at the Cathedral. She will recite The Emigrant Irish by Evan Boland, and saying, Mary Robinson, that is, that County Mayo full of excitement ahead of this visit. I had a good warm greeting with President Biden at the dinner last night, she said, and that she expects the President's speech in Ballina to refer to the Irish tradition of this light in the window. But I think we've got a few candles there, a light in Knock as well, at the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Knock. And clearly the White House press pack there getting the various photos. And I suspect, obviously, questions from the press pack as well as regards this security breach, with the court appearance due in Boston later today. But the President indicating when he was questioned about that in Dublin yesterday that he was fairly relaxed in that none of the security breaches were, as he said, contemporaneous. But we hope to see the President emerging there and getting the latest pictures. Just also to reflect that he'll be visiting some other areas, including a hospice that's been named in honour of his son, of course, who died of a brain tumour. And that, a very personal visit. The cameras won't be sharing that. But we're keeping you waiting here, tantalising as to whether the President will emerge from behind that pillar as the photographers get their cameras out of the way. But we'll keep you updated, of course, on this fourth and final visit to Ireland, and assessing, of course, its importance, not just in terms of UK relations, but back home in the United States, because we do expect him to announce this second term, the run for the presidential race in 2024. These pictures, of course, doing him no harm back home in the United States. But we're told he will fly back to Delaware after this visit today. Air Force One, the big 747 jumbo jet, will be flying back to the United States tomorrow morning. Well, we've been waiting patiently, but no sign of him as yet. But don't fret on that, because Patrick is with you for this next hour, and we'll be following that presidential visit live in County Mayo, having all the latest. Stay with us here on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the question.